Hello everyone. I am your dark narrator here to guide you today. I know many of you use this video to help you drift off to sleep, but before you do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also drop a comment letting us know where you're from and what time you're watching. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. The Beacon House Massacre. A crime too horrible for words. So horrible, in fact, that it fled the front pages as soon as the finer details began to trickle into the public sphere. Imagine how terrible a crime must be before the pack of vultures that dare call themselves the press in our day. And age will quietly allow the sensational details of a socialite scandal to slip through their grasp. An act of mass murder so horrible that without fail, every first responder to the crime scene had either left the emergency services entirely or been placed on leave. 38 people. One New Year's Eve celebration. One survivor. One killer who, in a dervish of blood and viscera, had stabbed and slashed and bludgeoned and burned his way through a room full of guests and catering staff. One killer found in the garden of his expensive Blue Mountains property with a steak knife, stabbed, hammered deep into his forehead. Self-inflicted. All the papers would dare mention was madness and carnage. Photos were hard enough to come by, but I'd heard it said that the editor of the Sydney Morning Herald had declined to furnish his front page with the one photograph of the Beacon House interior that his photographer had managed to capture. Instead, they played the human angle, a contrast to the savagery of the man who had brought so much misery into the world. Photos of the victims and their grieving families. Photos of the alleged killer lying unconscious in a hospital bed, his face half hidden by a thick layer of bandages. Malachi Durant had once been the darling of the Sydney architectural scene, heralded as the next Frank Lloyd Wright, praised by his contemporaries for his command of flow, space, and light. I must admit, though, as a layperson, I had little understanding of what those terms meant in terms of architecture. I had been assigned by the state's attorney as a psychiatric expert to assess Malachi Durant's mental state before the trial. Though the prosecutor did not believe the insanity defense Malachi's lawyers had put forward, for me there was little doubt. Sane men did not butcher their friends and family on special occasions, and certainly not in the middle of the holiday season. The scar on Malachi Durant's forehead was minuscule in comparison to the injury, just to the right of center and only an inch above his eyebrow. His right eye, brown, glassy, and unfocused, followed lazily behind the left one, blue as he focused on my entry into my office on Wednesday morning. From the doctor's report, I knew that in his madness he had jammed the steak knife deep into his skull and pounded it through the bone into his forebrain by bashing his head against a wall. Then, somehow still conscious, he had wriggled the blade to and fro until his right temporal lobe was nothing more than a mess of blood and fatty tissue. I sat down opposite Malachi Durant, mass murderer. Good morning. A slight movement of his left eyelid, half hidden under a curtain of limp, once curly black hair, was all the sign Malachi gave that he had understood me. My name is Dr. Raymond Hunter, and I paused. I'd given this speech to dozens and dozens of patients, but the words felt stale in my mouth. The look in Malachi Durant's good eye demanded more than my usual fare. I dipped momentarily into honesty. I'm here to assess your mental state before your trial, Mr. Durant. Before returning to my usual speech, I'd also like to get to know you a little better. Malachi Durant gave a faint smile. Regret and sadness played across his expression as he watched me sit. I took my time, carefully considering tactics. Durant had been induced into a coma after the massacre, one which lasted for 2 months, about 6 weeks longer than it should have, according to the doctors, and when he awoke he had just screamed for days in spite of all attempts to both sedate and reason with him. I did not want to choose the wrong words and push him back into the darkness that he had somehow emerged from. I needed to get a feel for it, to understand its contours before I started taking any steps into unfamiliar terrain. Where would you like to start? I asked, giving him control. The muse lied to me, he said simply. Your muse? I asked. Malachi shook his head, looking out the window. A muse, the muse of the house. She was fake. I frowned. You didn't like the house? Malachi shook his head again, refusing to look at me. The house was beautiful, but it was... He swallowed hard, tears beginning to form. Corrupt. I paused and took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to rush onward with more questions, but I could see that Malachi was fragile enough as it was. I would temper my curiosity and take small steps for his sake. She lied to me. He turned to look at me. His right eye was twitching as he fought back the tears. How can an angel lie? He sobbed and slumped forward in his chair. It was a genuine question, a plea for help from a man lost in a storm-tossed sea. I started to recognize bits and pieces of the terrain in which Malachi Durant was lost. I nodded slowly and then spoke. Malachi, I can see that you're quite upset, and I want to do everything I can to help you, but I need you to talk to me. Malachi looked up at me and took a deep breath, nodding slowly. I continued, we won't open any doors you don't want to. We won't go down any path you don't want to. But I may need to ask you questions from time to time. But just remember, you decide what you want to answer. You're in control of how you get home. I'm just here to get you there. Malachi Durant smiled at me, and so help me God, I liked him. There was a kindness in those eyes, an innocence that belied the horrors that he had inflicted upon his fellow man. Don't want to open the wrong door. He laughed just once, bitterly. Can you tell me about your muses? I pluralized my question, taking an educated guess. Malachi nodded, straightening up. I just thought I had a gift for understanding spaces, you know? He smiled, that regretful smile again. I just called them muses because that's what creative people do, right? Another wave of pain broke across Malachi's face. But the house, that was more than the usual creative inspiration, you know? It was... He shuddered. Doc? I nodded. What is it? What if you were doing something every day that filled you with joy, and what if you woke up one day to discover you'd been working for a nightmare? He looked at me, his lower jaw trembling. The angel? I asked. Did she make you do something bad? Malachi shrugged. I didn't think it was bad at the time. I nodded sagely, recognition dawning. Did she ask you to hurt your friends? Malachi recoiled from me as though I had struck him, curling up into a ball on the chair opposite me. No, he snapped flatly. It was the house, he wailed. I built her a cage and she made me watch her feed, watch her eat them from the inside. Malachi began rocking back and forth. They can't fool me again, can't use me anymore. He whispered to himself, now staring blankly. I won't do it, I won't do it, I won't do it. Malachi gripped his knees tighter, holding himself while some inner tension wound him up tighter and tighter. Malachi? I asked, my voice soft. She ate them. He screamed at me, leaping from his chair to the coffee table. He landed precariously at its edge, and the table toppled out from under him as he leaned into me, face to face. I pushed myself away from his sudden advance, and we both fell, screaming, myself calling for security and Malachi screaming over and over. It wasn't me! It wasn't me! I pulled up the tab on the can of Coke, my hand still shaking, and put it to my lips. Adrenaline or not, I could have really done with something stronger in that moment. I closed my eyes, breathing deep and counting my breaths one at a time. When I reached 10, I finally felt a little more settled. I turned to the pile of reports and photographs on my desk. It was the stuff of nightmares, to be sure, but I steeled myself as I dug through the medical examiner's reports looking for something that tracked with Malachi's rantings. Eaten them, he had said, from the inside. I spent more time on the text of the reports than on the photographs. I may have had years of medical training behind me, but the pictures of the massacre truly were of another nature entirely. Nowhere in the reports did I read anything about bite marks specifically, but there were a handful of details that struck me as odd. One report about an older gentleman mentioned his dermis and superior vena cava ruptured as though by sharp implement. Puckering on surface suggests exit wound. No corresponding entry on back. Possible serrated blade. Would require exceptional force. I thought this part was odd enough in and of itself, but the ME had scrawled in later. No tool marks found on ribs under wound site. Not so strange, I thought, if the blade had been pushed in horizontally. That wasn't the only odd note in the pile of autopsy reports. The next report related details of a fatal head injury. Wound is approximately 84 millimeters long and 3 millimeters wide. Lack of bone fragments around wound site suggests rotary cutting tool. Another note had been scrawled in between the lines. How the hell did he get them to stay still for all this carnage? And then continued, but no bone dust found around wound site. Did he clean it? I frowned, turning to the next report. Radius and ulna appear to have been removed with surgical precision before being stabbed into the ocular cavities of Miss Denning. See Report 17 of this case file. Single cut from elbow to wrist with transverse cuts perpendicular to first. Wounding indicates extreme precision. Tool marks on bones suggest single cut with exceptionally sharp blade. Bruising and vascular constriction suggest pre-mortem injury. As noted in Report 17, bones must have been cleaned prior to subsequent use. I thumbed through the pile to the report on Miss Denning. Both femurs shattered by blunt force trauma. Bruising around fracture sites indicate pointed impact with similar radius to adult male fist. Someone had added their own footnote, this time in red pen, impossible. Before the report continued, lack of injury to Mr. Durant's hands precludes this explanation. COD ocular and cranial trauma due to wounding with forearm bones of Mr. Jackson. Absence of blood and tissue on bone exterior suggests cleaning with unknown agents prior to use. I shook my head. I could understand the state's attorney's reluctance to accept insanity as a defense. Certainly Malachi Durant was crazy, but still coherent enough to perform a surgical excision and then clean the bones in a manner that left no traces. That did not at all look like the man who had been in my office but an hour beforehand. My mouth compressed to a thin line. I began to feel like I was being played for a fool. I took the afternoon off and drove out to the Blue Mountains, the setting for Malachi's first triumph as well as his downfall. The new wing of the Lithgow Art Gallery was 2 stories of gracefully curving brushed steel and glass. But more than its gentle shape, the gallery captured the afternoon sunlight and seemed to almost hold it, growing brighter even as the day finally gave way to night. The air inside seemed almost to tingle, and pillars of liquid gold would slide across the floor, their slow march highlighting one exhibit after another. Somehow Durant's genius had bent even sunlight to his will, causing the march of sunbeams to move at slightly different rates. Admiring the Durant tour, are you? I turned to the woman beside me. She was short and solidly built, her thick glasses catching bits and pieces of sunlight as she watched me watching the procession of sunbeams across the tiled floor. Durant tour? I raised an eyebrow. It's part of the design of the building. She raised her arm, pointing to the slanting windows at the building's corner. I took note of the name tag pinned to her lapel. Sheila Green, curator. Between her long, almost white hair, the black clothes and crocheted shawl, and the thick silver necklace about her shoulders, she gave off the vibe of a kindly witch. I wondered if she had a cottage somewhere. I looked from the Sheila to the windows and back again. How? Sheila smiled again. Different materials in each pane. Some glass, some Lexan, all different thicknesses, and a few others use nitrogen or argon, trapped between layers. I nodded, high school physics rising up from the depths of my memory. Refractive indexes. Indices. Sheila corrected me reflexively. I craned my head, staring up at the windows, marveling at the secrets hidden in their apparent uniformity. Ingenious. It was a scene that stirred something that was both primal but also peaceful within me. For just a moment I had the sense that I was viewing a mountain from the inside, all power and force trapped in state, the potential of stone waiting to be released, exploding into sculpture. It makes you think, doesn't it? Sheila's voice was like a bucket of ice water to my reverie, but she had recognized the look on my face. Makes you feel. I corrected for her. Do you get a lot of artists coming here for the atmosphere? Sheila nodded, casting her gaze of the collection of sculptures on the pedestals beneath the sunbeams. More than for the exhibits, actually. She regarded me with her gaze once more. But you're not an artist. I nodded sadly, suddenly regretful of the life choices that had taken me out of the path of Durant's sunbeams. I suppose not. I turned to her. But looking at this, it makes me want to create something. Sheila smiled. You're not the only one. We're actually running classes on Saturdays. She tilted her head at me, not sure what to make of the logical man, so obviously out of place here. I laughed a little nervously. Oh no, I'm definitely not an artist. Sheila shrugged. But you can still feel it? The energy of the space here? I stopped cold. I was a logical man. I believed and trusted in the evidence of my senses. I was grounded and rational. I believed in Occam's razor, and the logic and order of the universe. But had I not been moved to the edge of a religious experience but a minute beforehand by the poetry and the refractive indices of various materials? Is that what it is? Sheila chuckled warmly. We see more than we really understand, but we still want to find the words for it. We use what we're familiar with, I suppose. She glanced over her shoulder at the gallery beyond. I opened my mouth, but only the sound of my breathing came out. Sheila Green was using my own material on me now. Energy and flow. Just nebulous, ill-defined terms for whatever it was about the geometry and aesthetics of the space that reacted with the human mind. like the way many people can sense a door frame that isn't quite all right angles, or a picture frame on a wall that isn't quite square. Mr. Durant certainly had a genius, Sheila nodded. As the saying goes, genius and madness are two sides of the same coin. I frowned. You think he's crazy? Sheila shook her head. No. So what was Beacon House? A mistake, Sheila said, her words turning dark. I'd hardly call a massacre a mistake. Sheila shook her head. Not the massacre, the house. How do you mean? Have you seen it? I shook my head. I haven't. Sheila turned towards the stairs. Wait here. She began walking away. What for? I called after her. You'll see. I stared after the gallery's curator long after she had passed out of sight. Suddenly I had a sense of something behind me. I turned to see the light through the panes had been stretched and was slowly changing color. I was seeing floodlights angled down through the windows at the roof's edge, emulating the sunbeams that had now started to touch the gallery's far wall. The other people in the room seemed to sense something as well. A man, maybe in his 30s, immediately turned for the exit, while a girl in her late teens passed through a beam at the gallery's far end and recoiled as though it had burned her. I could feel it too. The air in the room had taken a sinister turn, and even suffused with light, the room seemed to be hemorrhaging it at the same time, growing more and more dark with each passing second. I felt my heart rate rise in response to some unknown threat, and just as suddenly, the effect wore off. The lights cutting out. I turned towards the stairs, starting out after Sheila Green. Curator. I was halfway down the curving staircase when she stepped out of a door marked staff only. She gave me a knowing look as she walked towards me. What was that? I don't know, but we call it the anti-theft system because nobody wants to be in the building when it's on. Again, I found myself lost for words. Mr. Durant's genius isn't perfect, Sheila said, as you can see. And Beacon House? I got the sense that Sheila believed that it wasn't madness. Is the other side of the coin? I nodded, turning to leave. Thank you for the tour, I said. I got 3 steps away before Sheila's question stopped me in my tracks. Do you wonder why none of them fought him? Why one man was never overpowered by 38 others? I stopped a moment. I'd assumed it was drugs. Did you test for that? Sheila asked. She'd seen through me. I may not have been with the police, but I was investigating, that was true enough. Even if I had the pile of autopsy reports in my office, I had never seen anything about tox screens. But then I hadn't been looking for the information, had I? I'll look into it, I said. Flow and space. They were the keys to understanding Malachi Durant's madness. Whatever it was in the gallery that produced that unsettling feeling when the floodlights had been turned on was bound to have been present at Beacon House. Sheila, the gallery curator, had hinted as much. Malachi had a keen understanding of something visceral when it came to aesthetics, and perhaps that visceral understanding had, in the right light, pushed his genius over the edge into madness. Malachi Durant was a lot more subdued that morning, more guarded. He sat almost sideways on the couch, staring at the wall. Good morning, Malachi. He did not respond, but his right eye twitched slightly in my direction. I went to the Lithgow Art Gallery yesterday. I offered. Again, Malachi was silent. You know, the sunbeams? They call it the Durant Tour. I've never seen anything like it before. I waited. Malachi was breathing harder now. He hugged his knees to his chest. It was so simple. He said, barely a whisper. Physics, I said. Malachi nodded. But people never think about it enough, you know? So they look up and it all looks the same and they think, magic. I nodded slowly. It makes the world that little bit more fantasic. Yeah. Malachi began to uncoil a little. Tell me about the floodlights, I asked. On the gallery? Malachi shrugged. I was improvising the... He paused, looking at me, nerves making his right eye twitch. Muse said no. But I thought I could make it work. Tell me about the gallery, Muse, Malachi. How did it speak to you? Do you think it's important? I nodded. I do. I need to know as much as I can about your muses. Malachi frowned. They're not mine. They just are the feel of a place, you know? Okay, I can accept that. Malachi leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring into space, remembering. The original gallery building was this monstrous concrete thing that tried to look avant-garde, but it was basically a concrete box. There's definitely a logic and order to the insides, but the flow, the energy can't get around the space. So the muse asked you to fix it? Malachi smiled at me. As best I could, it showed me how. The gallery didn't want to move the car park, but the extension had to go on the northern side. They didn't want to render the old front wall on the inside either or cut the doorways into the old wing. But the flow of the new wing had to be able to pass through the old box. I raised an eyebrow. Like an eddy current in a river bend. Malachi sat upright, his eyes sparkling. Exactly, you get it right? I wrinkled my nose. Not really, I understand what you did, but I don't really understand how or why it works. Malachi shrugged. Same design wouldn't have worked in a different spot, even on the other side of the road. I frowned. Why? Landscape, Malachi said, as if that held all the clues. People think of it like an art, but there's a precision in it too. The flow on the other side of the road is all different buildings, different lighting. It's subtle, but even the difference of a few meters can throw the whole effect out. You get the picture, but it's fuzzy. You make it sound like the gallery is some kind of receiver. I chuckled softly at the thought, but the sudden intensity of Malachi's stare made me stop. Now you know the truth, he said. Beacon House. He nodded. There are actually 3 levels to the house. The middle calls to the upper until you open the doorway to the lower level. And that's how she got loose. 3 levels? I thought the house only had 2. Did you put in a basement or something? Malachi smiled at me as though he were regarding a child. The office next to the master bedroom. Open the door from the master ensuite into the hall and then turn on the light in the office closet. You'll see it. A sudden thought occurred to me. Malachi, did you build a secret room in Beacon House? Was there something in it? Malachi's smile didn't become any less paternal. I guess I did, and there still is. I licked my lips. What was it? Malachi sighed. You'll find out, Doc. But are we done now? Malachi interrupted me, standing up. I'm hungry. I called to the prosecutor and got permission to visit Beacon House. I was met at the front gate of the property by a uniformed officer in his early 40s. He shook my hand. James Fenwick. He said, fishing a set of keys to the house from a pocket, and pressed the remote for the gate. I walked in, Officer Fenwick keeping strides with me. Have you been inside before, Doc? I shook my head. I'm supposed to be assessing Mr. Durant for trial, but he keeps shutting down, making me jump through hoops. Do you think he's crazy? Fenwick was starting to huff and puff his way up the hill, struggling to keep pace with me. I don't know what to think. On the one hand, he's emotionally unstable, deathly afraid of this place, and keeps rambling about being betrayed by angels. I said, looking at the large building ahead of us. The house was broad and low, with a weatherboard exterior. Warm yellow paint on the exterior evoked the memory of sunlight, and the brilliant white trim of the windows gave another sense of light to the space. And on the other? I sighed. On the other hand, he took apart 38 people with a precision that belies insanity, and a bloodlust that absolutely screams psychosis. Fenwick nodded. You're lucky they've cleaned the place up. They got most of the blood, but they had to peel up the floor to get all of Maria Edgeworth and one of the caterers. I stopped. Peel up the floor? Officer Fenwick nodded again. Burn them into it, fuck knows how. Kinda looks like they were flash fried, but only on one side, and then melted into the floor, right down to the slab. He stepped onto the porch and thrust the key into the lock with a single graceful movement before twisting the key and opening the door. After you, Doc. I stepped into the house and was immediately struck by the space inside. It was the strangest house I had ever seen, let alone been inside. Ahead of me, a small 3-sided vestibule opened up into a 7-sided room just like the outside of the house, large enough to host a small concert. Several doorways led off to the sides, and even with the lights off, the place was bright. Up above the ceiling gave way to rooms which overlooked the internal space, and then soared on upwards to a domed vault dotted with round windows, seemingly at random, before ending in sheets of glass at the very top. The very peak had to be 4 stories above me now. I whistled. Yep, strange place. Officer Fenwick nodded at the strange roof. Stranger still, he said, gesturing to the full-length sliding glass doors taking up 2 sides of the ground floor. Why the hell nobody broke out of all the carnage? Wouldn't have taken much, even with the double glaze. I nodded, remembering Sheila Green's question from the day before. If everyone had been drugged, why hadn't the ME done a tox screen? I passed by gaze over the floor. Veins of fine black imperfection flowed steadily through polished white marble. Despite several missing pieces, there was a clear pattern in how the pieces had been laid, and the veins in the marble spiraled outward from a central point, forming 7 petals which overlapped each other. The effect was much more gaudy than the feeling of the gallery, but still no less impressive. The same color scheme from inside repeated, gave the place an outdoor feel, but one which still had managed to banish the winter chill beyond those gigantic sliding doors. Is there a basement, do you know? I turned to Officer Fenwick to see him watching me. Nope. Don't think you could put anything underneath this place, not without it falling over. Can you show me to the master bedroom? Fenwick pointed to a door off to my left. Middle door, leads upstairs. Master bedroom is behind where you come up. I nodded my thanks, and Officer Fenwick excused himself, pulling a packet of cigarettes from a shirt pocket as he left the house. Any problems? Give me a yell. When the door closed, I felt something strange. The history of the house, the sense of violence, disappeared almost instantly. Like the gallery, there was a sense of warmth, and the sunlight seemed to gather in even the darkest corners of the house. The illusion only faltered for a moment as I sidestepped a patch of missing tiles. I felt it the warmth of the house twist, spying a few short strands of brown hair sticking out of solid concrete, as though they had been driven in there with great force. I suppressed a shudder and opened the door, finding myself in a small den. Bookshelves lined each wall, and a television stood on the left-hand wall, a couch between myself and it. The staircase started in the corner immediately opposite the door and went straight up. Reaching the top, I found myself in the single hallway which circled the entire second story. To my left, the sky was beginning to turn pink and orange with the setting of the sun, and the lights of homes in the valley below Beacon House began to come on, declaring their existence among the trees for all to see. Outside, a balcony circled the entire house, but I declined to take a shortcut and backtrack, instead passing by all of the rooms on the upper level. The house was like a hotel, one central corridor backing onto rooms, a library, a gym, guest bedrooms, 1, 2, 3. A second staircase, a descent down which led me to a small room off the kitchen. I continued on, coming at last to the office and master en suite and Malachi Durant's bedroom. The air up here was thick and heavy, and dust motes danced in the hazy light which came in from outside. There was a window in Durant's office that overlooked the gallery floor. I flicked the light switch and rolled up the blind, peering down to the floor below, and I was struck by the pattern on the floor below. While the obvious pattern had been enforcing the organic pattern of cracks and imperfections in the marble to flow like graceful curves like the petals of a flower. There were cuts in other pieces of the marble too which showed up in the afternoon light. Symbols and letters of unknown origin were formed by the hair-thin grouting between tiles. Lines where the flooring did not need lines curved around the pattern of flower petals, and even with their missing pieces, the lettering filled me with a sense of calm and serenity like that I had felt in the gallery. I frowned at this curious faculty of Durant's as I returned to the hallway to open the door to the master en suite, and in the corner of the doorframe, I caught sight of something odd. Flush with the level of the wooden door and scoured clean of the white paint that covered the rest of the door was a tiny circle of metal. I ran my finger over it. It lacked grooves of any kind, so it couldn't have been a screw. I checked the door frame and found a circle of the same material flush with the level of the first in the frame, and again in the doorway to the office. I checked the master bedroom door and found exactly the same scenario. So there was a ring of metal running at knee height through the entire upper floor. But why? Acting on a hunch, I licked my fingers and touched the 2 contacts in the bedroom doorway. Nothing. No tingle whatsoever, so if they didn't carry some kind of current, what were they for? But then I remembered the closet. I ran back to the office and opened the doorway into the office closet. The closed was a typical closet. Sturdy shelves lined the back half, and at the very top, just behind the light switch nestled in the cornice above the doorway, was a small manhole, still covered. Let's see what's in your secret room, Malachi. I smiled and flipped the switch. It was as though that one light switch kept the universe in being. I had a brief sensation of falling before a heavy shove in my chest pushed me back into the office. Light had fled, and the world outside had been reduced to black nothingness. The house was cast in monochrome light into which a sickly blue-gray light filtered through sharp angles and cracks. I stood and peered through the office window and screamed. Below, the angular symbols in the floor bled the same sickly blue-gray light from which stepped figures made of nothingness. They moved through the room, standing at the edge of the marble flower, while heads made of nothingness stared at me with eyes unseen. I became aware of the sudden depth in the floor, seeing an infinite abyss falling away far below. I spied a straight, wispy form flowing upward from the depths like a sea serpent. It passed through the flower in the center of the room, rising, a hideous serpentine form made from flesh of every color, many of them clearly inhuman. Crawling into being from the abyssal darkness far below it, flowed around the lines of force in the pattern which now visibly crackled with power. Power turned dark by the pattern in the walls of Beacon House. As I watched the writhing of its flukes grasp and clutch at nothingness in the air, around it climbing higher and higher on empty air, reaching for the apex of the roof, and as it turned on me, I saw that the flukes which lined its body were arms, human and humanoid, crudely sewn to its body and weeping hideous black fluids and more of that blue-gray light. The body flared out at the head to end in a flat face covered in scales black as night-colored white by paint, which held the shape of a humanoid woman with wings of burning sunlight. It was the only point of warmth in the entire scene around me, and I clung to it even as twin soulless eyes of deepest purple on either side fixed themselves on me. And as it reared back its head, I felt the monster drawing in its breath, pulling at my soul as it moved to strike. I screamed even louder, helpless, wanting to get free, but unable to move. Fearful that if I broke gaze with the heavenly angel on that hideous face, I would never find my way back to the world of light that I had known. But at the very last second, I dove to the side as the beast lunged forward. I found myself in the office closet, the beast crashing through the window, showering me with glass. I reached up for the switch as the hideous face turned on me. I slapped the switch and was physically catapulted back to my simple little world, nearly hitting the ceiling and smashing back to the ground. Pain blossomed in my back, and I became aware of Officer Fenwick shouting to me, "Hunter! Hunter, where are you?" I gasped once, twice, and then threw up. I screamed again and passed out. A hidden explosive. That's what they called it. The doctor said I was lucky to survive given my proximity to the explosion that had torn apart the inner wall of Durant's office. Nobody questioned the lack of explosive residue, and despite taking my recommendation to take a look at the walls of Beacon House, the police reported no other evidence of explosives within the walls. The metal circles I had seen in the doorways had been passed off as simple reinforcing bars, being made out of thread bar as they were. Everything simple, everything neat and straightforward. I knew better, of course. Durant's muse. I had seen Durant's muse just as he had, in all her terrifying glory, decorated with the flesh of her victims, growing stronger and stronger with every kill. I called the state's attorney the next day and handed in my diagnosis. Delusional psychosis. I pointed to the ample evidence in the murder, adding in a hatchet job of my own about symbols, and the pseudo-occult nature of the house and its arrangement, as well as transcripts of my interviews with Durant. His ranting about being used by an angel, and the 3 levels of his 2-level house. The state's attorney wasn't happy with my diagnosis, but I didn't care. After what Malachi Durant had been through, he deserved to think himself insane. Maybe given enough time, he would be able to see himself in that light and forget the reality of what he had witnessed. For me, there was no such reprieve. I have to carry the truth with me. An open door and a light switch were the only things standing between our world and hell. They tore down Beacon House the day after Malachi was declared mentally unfit. I watched it happen, and it brought me some small measure of peace, but I'm still fearful turning on any switch, anywhere. Because I have no way of knowing if the angles are just right, if the flow of light and space is perfect, if the signal is perfect to turn on another beacon. I am a communications officer. When people dial 999 and ask for the police, I am the one they get through to. It's tough, I'm not going to lie. I wear a uniform. It's like a police uniform, but blue. I don't have a stab vest because we work in an office. We sit at huge banks of desks in lines with supervisors standing at the end of everyone. I have a headset with earpieces and a microphone, and a computer in front of me. The light flashes. I press accept and I type as I ask questions. Name, location, incident category, assault, suspicious package, burglary, etc. I take all the details I can and categorize the incident by level of urgency. If someone's come home and found their house broken into, that's not as urgent as a robbery in progress. I work 10-hour shifts with call after call after call. If I need to take a piss, I have to raise my hand to get excused by the supervisor. They time you too. We get a huge variety of calls. Sometimes it's something and nothing time wasters. Sometimes you hear some fucking awful things. My third shift, I got a call from a woman who was just screaming. She'd woken up from a nap and found her baby dead in its cot. I will never forget that as long as I live. Losing a child is something you never get over. I know a few of the guys have started to drink a bit too much. Not alcoholics or anything, but every time they come home to a few drinks. It's the only way you can sleep. If I'm totally honest with myself, I can tell I'm slipping a little down that road. Last week I was working the night shift. It has a rep for being pretty bad. You get a lot of violent calls on the night shift. I'd been working for about 8 hours at that time. 2 more to go. I was surviving on coffee, shoving one call after another to the guys in dispatch. Then I got this call. The light flashes, I take a drink and click answer. Police 999, what's your emergency? All I hear is breathing. Now this isn't that unusual. We sometimes get people who are running, panicking, confused. Sometimes people are injured, sometimes they're trying to make a call without being heard. Police 999, my name is Laura. Can you tell me the nature of your emergency? No response. The breathing sounds like a woman or maybe a child. I need to know your location and what's happening. Then I can get help to you as soon as possible. Are you able to speak to me? There's a soft sound that comes then. Like a scratching. Like someone scraping their fingernail on the mesh surface of a microphone. I pause for a second, then collect myself. Are you unable to talk out loud? The scratching sound comes again. Scratch. Okay. Let me see if I can help. 1 scratch for yes, 2 scratches for no, do you understand? Scratch. Great, like I said, my name is Laura. I'm going to get officers to you as soon as I can. Please stay on the line. I start waving my supervisor over, who spots me straight away. I point at the screen where he sees my typing. Caller is unable to speak aloud, attempting other communication methods. He nods, understanding straight away, and jogs over to the bank of IT guys. Are you injured? Scratch, scratch. Are you in fear for your life or your physical safety? Scratch. Are you able to get to a safe place? Scratch, scratch. I can see my supervisor talking to the computer guys who are trying to trace the call. From the time it's taking, it seems to be a mobile, so they have to go through the phone masts. Is it a person who is causing you to fear for your safety? Scratch. And a small intake of breath. Are they there with you now? Scratch, scratch. But you are afraid that they will hear you? Scratch. Are you restrained in any way? Scratch, scratch. Don't worry, I tell her. We'll find a way to get you help. Are you in a house? Scratch. Is it their house? Silence. Do you know where you are? Scratch, scratch. Can you see a window to look out of? Scratch, scratch. I was starting to panic a bit now. I'm highly trained, but you only get a few calls a year which strike you like this. I was starting to worry about my ability to help. If they don't know where they are and they can't speak to me, how can I send a car if I can't find out where she is? Then I hear something. The breathing gets quicker. Are you still there? I ask. There is no response. Can you let me know you're okay? There's a scraping, a scrabbling sound, and then the line goes dead. The call light flicks out. Just an empty dial done. I swear. Not quite as under my breath as it should be. Looking straight over to the IT lads, I see them shaking their heads. No luck. No trace on the call. I work the rest of my shift feeling sick. It's mostly routine, but I just can't get that out of my head. See, as a comms officer, when something comes up like that and you can't manage to find out where that person is, you feel responsible. If that woman is hurt or killed, then surely a lot of that's down to me. On the drive home through empty city streets, I run that conversation through my head over and over again. I think what I could have done differently. I worry about that woman, where she is, what's happening. I get home throwing my bag on the sofa. I pull a bottle of beer out of the fridge and pop off the cap, fixing the cat her dinner as she rubs around my ankles. That woman could be being raped or tortured, and we had an opportunity to find her and we didn't manage it. I had visions of a woman locked in a cellar somewhere, at the mercy of some pervert. I flopped down on the sofa, stuck the TV on and slumped. I woke up half an hour later to the phone ringing. I stirred, blinking. It was dark still, just starting to get lighter. It was the home phone. Now I almost never use the landline. I mostly just have it because it's the only way I can get Wi-Fi. This has got to be something bad. My mom maybe, who hasn't been well. I drag myself to my feet and head as quickly to the phone as I can, fumbling with it and pressing it to my ear. Hello? There was nothing. Just breathing. My stomach drops. Hello? Without the background noise of the office, without the tapping keys and the voices of the other officers, I can hear more clearly. My stomach knots, I feel like I might vomit, the beer churning. Anna, I ask, Scratch, are you... This isn't funny. Scratch, I swallow, mouth dry. Is it... Baby, are you safe? Scratch, I feel the panic bubble over, I can barely form my words. Baby, please tell me, wherever you are, whatever I can do, please tell I'm me. Scratch, where are you? Scratch. I can hear her, those tiny, soft, whispering breaths. Then one catches, a sound of panic, a scraping on the floor. Anna, and then she replies, Mummy. And then the phone cuts out. The caller withheld their number. She's called back every night since. Every night is the same. No answers, just her little breaths and the scratches on the floor. However many times she calls, I will answer. Every time. Perhaps one night I will be able to find some way to help her. 7 times she's called. 1 call for every year of her life. 1 call for every year she's been dead. I work for the blog section of a local newspaper, and being new and young, I often get sent out on crappy assignments. My top pieces involve interviews with poodle groomers, sewage plant managers, and our local clown. Yeah, quitting's not really an option in this job market, so I've stuck it out. My manager has noticed my dedication, I suppose, so he threw me a bone today. I was sent to interview a man who residents had seen being taken into the police station in handcuffs. The only thing that concerned citizens knew for sure was that he was a stranger, and he was splattered in blood. The police weren't talking. On my way over there, I thought I'd finally gotten my foot in the door. This was a wild card. It could be nothing. Or I could end up famous overnight. I was genuinely excited. Now I just feel shaken and distressed. Hey, aren't you Rob's kid? A vaguely familiar policeman asked as I entered the lobby of their decently sized station. I shook off the torrential rain still dripping from my hair, and nodded. Constant recognition was one of the weird benefits of returning to my small town after college. Yep, I'm here on behalf of the dispatch to interview the man that was just brought in. His chubby jolliness faded into grim distaste. He paused a full 5 seconds before finally replying. I don't think a good kid like you needs to be talking to that guy. I politely began the spiel my manager had given me, even as I got my writing materials out of my pack. It was important to look as if I was proceeding despite the refusal. I didn't actually know if I was legally allowed in, but I acted like I was. Well, it's my job, and he has the right to visitors, so... Yeah, he said flatly, cutting me off with an understanding sigh. Just don't let him get to you. He led me back through a couple dingy hallways. The back held the temporary cells, and he unlocked the first gate. Grayson's in the last cell. I'll wait here. Okay. I entered by myself, moving past a series of gated cells. The last contained the only person in lockup. His once decent business wear was splattered in blood, yes, but he was not at all the image of violence I'd imagined. Tall, lanky, and topped by thinning blonde hair, he looked every bit an average businessman. If he'd had glasses, he might have been an exact match for one of my professors back at the university. For a moment, I felt let down. It didn't seem likely that there would be any sort of incredible story here, just some sort of mix-up. That feeling lasted only until he began speaking. He saw my media badge and my pen and paper and sighed with resignation. I suppose you want my story? Yeah. I thought so. After much consideration, I do think that I should tell somebody what happened. I'm aware of how it sounds, so I've mostly shut up until now, but I'll tell you what I haven't told the police. That'll satisfy my ethical obligation. It's the least required, and the most I'm willing to do, because of the social risk. You'll believe me, you're young and look sharp, but most won't. I have no intention of ending up in an institution. Don't smile. I'm serious. Thank you. Now I do have to say that this all began quite some time ago. I was young then, younger than you. The memories came back to me with the fog of very early youth, likely preteen. They were nightmares, you see. They haunted me for nearly a year. It was a thing, and my mother and father tried their best to find treatment for me. The nightmares went away only after I briefly joined the church, but I still chalk that up to coincidence. The religion thing is a whole other debate I've no energy to get into. It's 30 years later, give or take. I'm driving cross-country on business with my partner. What business am I in? It's not relevant to what happened. Smith and I were driving cross-country when we stopped at a dilapidated motel right outside a small town. We'd seen absolutely nothing but Midwestern farm fields for hours, so we took a walk into town to get some beer. Glenworth Heights. Could have been any other town. Looked like a million others and looked like yours. But as I walked into this town, you see, this is why I mentioned my childhood nightmares, I had the oddest sensation of déjà vu. Standing on that short main street, I felt like I recognized that particular pattern of storefronts. 45 people. That's what the sign said. Glenworth Heights, population 45. It was a stopover on the way from somewhere to somewhere else and nothing more. But I'd seen those buildings before, cast in another light and another context. I'd seen them in nightmare. I'd seen the sky bleeding. I'd seen these buildings rotting. Their inhabitants had dwelled within, maimed, misshapen, mutated. Smith had a good sense for when I was spooked. I remained tense but tried to shrug off the strange feeling and allay his concerns. Whatever mask of calm I managed to put on, it certainly fell away as we entered the liquor store. I'd called to mind the clerk's face before I'd gone inside. I'd told myself that he couldn't possibly be in there. I'd had a nightmare over 30 years ago about a 20-something hippie type whose facial skin had been carefully excised in front of me by steaming hooks. In that dream world, his bleeding cheek and jaw muscles had been exposed to the air, but he'd continued working the front under threat of even worse torture at the hands of the store's owner, who had become some sort of hissing acidic monstrosity that lurked in the back room. His hooked limbs dripped acid and... Lord, I can't even describe. Forgive me. I just need a moment. All right, where was I? The clerk. I'd called his face to mind, keeping it firmly in my mental view, and I was greeted with that exact face as I entered the store. I couldn't help but stare. Perhaps I'd been to this town as a child on some sort of family road trip, and perhaps I might have had nightmares about it later. But how could I have dreamed 30 years ago about a clerk that was here now? The store owner lurked in the back room, a thuggish man in a yellowed white shirt who lounged near a fan. I left the store immediately, and Smith knew something was up. He began to get belligerent. I assured him everything was fine. He knew I needed the money from our business trip to pay off my shrew ex-wife's onerous child support lien. I wasn't going to welch, but there was another concern on my mind. I'd stumbled into a waking link to my childhood nightmares, and those nightmares had held a distinct threat. The town in my dreams hadn't simply been horrible for surreal reasons. No, a gaping fissure in the earth had opened somewhere nearby. Through that vast searing crevice, as a child, I'd witnessed people clawing at burning air from rivers of torturous bile, blinding crimson and azure flames that kept thousands perpetually cooking alive. And the screams. Don't frown with disbelief. It was just a nightmare. It was a metaphor, right? For fear, for pain, for change. The townspeople had all changed and then marched to the gap to worship it, widen it, and bring through demons untold. It was just a dream, except that I dreamed the location of the fissure. Smith was suspicious of me, so I couldn't ditch him, but I made up a story about checking for money I'd left behind on a previous business trip. We walked out into the sparse woods behind the town, and Smith kept his hand near his gun, but I was far more worried about encountering that hellish rift. I was enormously relieved to find an empty forest glen, and then subtly chilled to realize that I remembered the lay of the jumbled rocks, swaying grasses, and towering trees. I'd seen this place. In a veritable trance, I wandered out into the high grasses. Once I was out in the center, I began to notice that the assembled rocks were strewn about in a pattern that was anything but random. It was a vast circle, and I was within. Bending down, I even found the specific rocks I remember seeing split apart before they'd begun belching flames. Runes. There were runes in the rocks, ancient runes in a style that looked Native American, or something even older. Smith grinned near me then as I touched the rocks. He'd figured that I'd found the spot where I'd stashed my supposed cash. He'd also figured, since I was far superior to his usual class of partners, that I must have had quite the sum hidden there. He didn't figure that I was also smarter than his usual spick partners. I lifted one of the ruined rocks and, well, his skull caved in. He was dead instantly. No, this blood on my shirt isn't from hitting him with a rock. And that's not why they brought me in. That act was self-defense, and I'll prove that in a court of law, or I'll at least get the jury to understand. A dead thug and a living, well-mannered white man like myself? I'm not worried about it. Don't make that face, I'm just being honest. But no, this isn't that blood on my shirt, because the blood from that impact shot to the earth like it had been pulled down by strange gravities. In fact, the red liquid spurted out of his head wound like a fountain, arcing right down to those runned rocks before me, and disappearing between. It wasn't nearly all of the blood in his body, but it was enough to be surprising. The rest soaked his clothes and the surrounding ground. Was it simply a nearby death that had reawakened latent energies? Or perhaps I'd accidentally reenacted some ancient ritual. In either case, I found myself standing in exactly the spot I'd dreamed 30 years before, watching that exact nightmare unfold, the ground splitting, flames erupting, and fiery heat radiating against my face as the screams of countless damned souls erupted into the real world. Yes, I'm serious. No, I'm not crazy. I'm completely sane. And that's why I ran. What sane person would have stayed in such a place? Hell itself had partially erupted into a half-mile-wide glen in the forest, some ancient ritual site. I ran back to town, intent on getting our car. I'd had the remaining sense, despite my panic, to grab the keys from Smith's pocket, but I did need something to calm my nerves. My hands shook violently. I knew I wasn't going to be able to drive, so I entered the town drugstore. I already knew the little old lady within. Her warm smile rang true against my surreal childhood memories. Her doddering husband worked the cash register while she picked out what I'd asked for, and I shuddered. In my dream, the old woman's skull had split open and her brain had grown teeth, forming a fleshy maw big enough to crush and eat her terrified husband's face. He'd died gurgling and betrayed by his lifelong love. And then his corpse had begun turning itself inside out, growing 1,000 little spider-like limbs from the inner edges of his skin and muscles. The resulting corpse thing had chased my terrified child self down the main street relentlessly, and my only escape had been waking in a screaming sweat. I remember him saying this yesterday, syllable for syllable. "What are you looking at?" He was asking out of kindness and confusion. He wasn't angry that I'd been staring at him while lost in memory. He was just worried about me, right up until the teeth slammed down and his face crumpled between brain matter jaws. Leaping back and knocking over product-filled shelves, I screamed in absolute terror. Who wouldn't? The old woman had become exactly what God, it was sickening. Not waiting for his corpse to animate, I ran, surrounded by blurry panic. The sky was beginning to bubble right over the town, even approaching a boil. It looked like a rapidly building normal storm, not yet blood like I'd dreamed. But I was no fool. There were screams echoing out up and down the street. Not the screams of the damned, but the screams of the living. Those unfortunate souls who hadn't yet turned, being slaughtered by their friends and loved ones. I wasn't changing. Why wasn't I changing? Had my presence at the ritual site protected me? Or was it the fact that these people had lived nearby the site their entire lives? Were they more susceptible somehow? On my desperate run back to the motel, and to my car, I almost bowled over a startled old man who had been heading into town. His skin was mottled and he was very frail. He gripped my arm with surprising strength, though, and screamed at me to be heard over the raging winds. He said, "What have you done, boy?" "I saw you. What did you do out in the woods? Did you disturb the stone ring?" My horrified stare was all the confirmation he needed. He said, "The ring is a barely cracked seal, and the plagued townsfolk are going to try to widen the crack. Perhaps destroy the seal completely. I'm too old to do what must be done. You must either move whatever sacrifice you made and burn the corpse, or you must return to town and kill every single one of the monsters those people have become." I stared at Grayson, my mouth dropping a half-inch. Holy shit, had this guy gone on a killing spree? I mean, I would have too if that had all really happened to me. "So the blood on your shirt, you killed all those people?" He looked at me as if I was a moron. Do I look like some spick enforcer? I've never fought a man in my life. Kill 40-odd horrible mutated monsters all by myself. No, that would never have worked. I see. So he'd gone back and moved Smith's body. That explained the blood on his shirt. Did that mean that there was still a small town populated by mutated horrors out there? Or had closing the rift destroyed or dispelled them somehow? "All right, I've told you what happened," he said plainly. "Any ethical obligation I had is now satisfied. It's on you." Shivering with confusion, I gave some polite goodbye and walked out in a daze. The cop who had let me in nodded as he saw my face. Guy's a real prick, huh? What do you mean? I asked, knowing that he hadn't been told Grayson's story. He was going over 100 down the highway in a car filled with drugs and hit some housewife's van, he said quietly, leading me back toward the front. Killed 3 kids. I had thought at first other than shock. How shitty could one person be? He had children he'd walked out on, he was involved in crime, he was vaguely racist. At least he'd gone back and... Wait, so he got blood on his shirt from the car accident? Yeah, the cop replied. What did you think it was? I froze right at the front door to the station. Outside, torrential rains beat down on the glass. Among all his other faults, Grayson was also a coward. He hadn't gone back. He'd just walked away. He'd been warned by decades-old dreams. He'd been led to the place and time of a tremendous disaster with knowledge of what was to come. And instead of becoming a hero, he'd screwed it all up and walked away. Was that the true nature of human beings then? How many scary stories had I heard in my lifetime? Expecting with each tale that I would rise to the occasion if they ever happened to me. Here I was, also doing nothing about it. What was there to do except stare out the window? I had no proof. If I did, I might have been able to call for aid, or go there myself and try to, as Grayson had put it, kill 40-odd mutated monsters all by myself. The thought made me quaver, and I kept finding reasons not to go and check it out for myself. Was I a coward too? I didn't want to believe him, but there was such an odd feeling in the air. So much for rising to the occasion, I had no proof. The story of the century, my first big break and possibly my last, would likely be believed by no one. There's nothing left to do now but post it online and hope. Hope that someone does something, or hope that Grayson was lying. After that, I'll watch the uncommonly intense rain and pray to God that it doesn't turn red. It was one of those super cold winter nights where the cold seeped through the walls no matter how high you turned up the heat. Outside, the wind howled, battering the windows and scattering brittle dead leaves across the yard. The air inside the house was still, almost too still, and despite the extra layers I wore, I couldn't shake the chill. My parents were off somewhere tropical, enjoying warm beaches and cocktails, and my sister was out doing something or other. That left me alone, or so I thought. I was sitting on my bed, bundled in a fleece blanket, scrolling through my phone. The screen's dim glow was the only light in the room, casting faint shadows on the walls. I had been trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping over me all night, chalking it up to the loneliness that always came when the house was this quiet. But then it happened. The room felt colder, and a weird, suffocating stillness settled over me. It wasn't just the usual quiet you'd expect in an empty house. It was something else. It was unnatural. That's when I noticed it. In the corner of my room, standing just at the edge of the shadows, was something. It was a figure. Its back was turned to me, but even in the dim light I could see enough to know it wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long, spindly limbs that hung too low. Its shoulders were slightly hunched, as if the weight of its grotesque frame was too much to bear. Its head was tilted down at an odd angle, and even though it didn't move, its presence was enough to make my skin crawl. I froze, and my phone slipped from my hands and landed on the mattress with a muffled thud. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was just a shadow from something outside. Maybe the wind rattling the windows was messing with my head. But as I stared, I realized it wasn't a trick of the light. The figure didn't move a muscle. It was totally still, but its presence filled the room and pressed down on me like a heavy weight. My mind was telling me to look away, to hide under the covers like a kid, but I couldn't. And then it spoke. Brian? It was my mom's voice. It was soft, warm, and familiar, just like I'd heard it 1,000 times before. My heart skipped a beat. She wasn't here. She couldn't be here, but the voice was so precise, so perfect, that for one awful moment I wanted to believe it was her. Brian, come here. This time it was my sister's voice. Her tone was sharp and impatient, like she was scolding me for something. But there was something off about it. The words felt hollow, like they didn't have the emotion to make them feel real. I was totally frozen, every muscle in my body stiff, as the figure didn't move a muscle. Then it started making other sounds. It even copied my dad's deep laugh, the creak of the old front door, even the soft chime of the grandfather clock downstairs. Each sound was eerily accurate but felt wrong, like someone had recorded them and played them back with a slight distortion. The figure didn't move a muscle for what felt like forever. Its back to me. Then slowly it started to turn. I never expected to find anything of significance while clearing out my great-aunt Theodora's house in Yorkshire. The elderly woman had lived alone for decades in the sprawling Victorian mansion, and after her passing at the age of 94, the task of sorting through her belongings fell to me. Most of her possessions were exactly what you'd expect: dusty furniture, outdated clothes, and box after box of faded photographs. But in the attic, buried beneath a stack of moldering blankets, I found something extraordinary. A leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. The cover was unmarked save for a single name written in flowing script: Aldrich Blackwood, 1665. My hands trembled as I opened it. Aldrich Blackwood had been a distant ancestor, a physician who lived through the Great Plague of London. I'd heard stories about him growing up, but I never knew any personal accounts had survived. The pages were remarkably well preserved, though the ink had faded to a rusty brown in places. As I began to read, I realized with growing unease that this was no ordinary physician's diary. 12th of May, 1665. Today I witnessed something that defies all medical knowledge I possess. The plague has begun to spread through London's streets, as we all feared it would. But there is something different about this outbreak, something that fills me with a deep and gnawing dread. I was called to attend young Thomas Whitmore, son of the merchant on Bread Street. The boy presented with the typical symptoms: fever, chills, and a small swelling in his neck. But when I examined the bubo more closely, I observed movement beneath the skin. Not the usual pulsing of infected tissue, but something deliberate, purposeful. When I lanced the swelling, what emerged was not merely pus and blood. I shall document this precisely, though my hand shakes to write it. The infected matter seemed to writhe of its own accord, and within it I glimpsed what appeared to be minute, thread-like structures, twisting and coiling like tiny eels. Young Thomas expired within hours. His father begged me to examine the body, convinced some curse had befallen his son. I agreed, though I now wish I hadn't. The boy's lymph nodes, when extracted, contained more of these strange fibers. Under my microscope, they appeared almost crystalline, with complex branching patterns unlike anything I've encountered in my studies of the disease. I have preserved several samples. God forgive me, but I must understand what this is. 15th of May, 1665. 3 more cases today, all showing the same peculiar characteristics. The fibers appear in every sample I examine. They seem to grow more complex, more organized with each passing day. I've begun sketching their patterns, though I fear my drawings do not do justice to their bizarre intricacy. My colleague, Dr. Edmund Halsey, believes I'm allowing fear and exhaustion to cloud my judgment. He claims I'm seeing patterns where none exist, that these are merely the typical signs of bubonic plague, but he hasn't observed them under the microscope as I have. He hasn't seen them move. I must document something else, though I hesitate to commit it to paper. The infected seem to share a common behavior in their final hours. They speak of visions, not the usual fevered hallucinations, but specific, consistent images. They describe vast networks of tunnels, branching endlessly beneath the earth. They whisper about something moving through these passages, something ancient that has been waiting. I tell myself these are merely the ravings of dying minds. Yet each patient describes the same scenes, down to the smallest detail. How can this be? 20th of May, 1665, I have made a terrible discovery. The samples I preserved. They've changed. The fibers have grown more numerous, forming intricate patterns that seem almost like writing in a language I cannot read. When I examine them, I feel a curious sensation, as if something is attempting to communicate through these bizarre structures. More disturbing still are the rats. London has always been plagued by them, but their behavior has become increasingly erratic. They gather in large groups, moving with an unnatural coordination. Yesterday I observed a group of them in my laboratory, clustered around the cabinet where I keep my samples. They seem to be listening for something. I've begun to experience strange dreams. I see the tunnels my patients described, endless passages that seem to pulse with their own heartbeat. Sometimes I hear whispers in languages that have never been spoken by human tongues. I tell myself this is merely the result of exhaustion and stress, but deep down I know better. 25th of May, 1665. The infection rate is growing exponentially, but that is not what truly terrifies me. It's the patterns. They're everywhere now, in the spread of the disease through the city, in the way the rats move through the streets, in the very arrangement of the bodies we collect each morning. Everything follows the same branching structure I first observed in those tissue samples. I've started mapping these patterns, and what emerges is impossible to ignore. The disease isn't spreading randomly. It's creating something, building something, using us as its medium. Dr. Halsey visited again today. He seemed troubled by my research, especially my maps and drawings. He suggested I take some time to rest, mentioned that many physicians have been driven to madness by the horrors we witness. But his eyes lingered too long on my samples, and I noticed his hands trembling as he spoke. After he left, I discovered several of my samples were missing. 1st of June, 1665, I can no longer sleep. The dreams have become too intense, too real. In them, I walk through those endless tunnels, following the branching patterns that have become so familiar. But now I understand what they are. A root system spreading through the very foundations of our city. And at the center of it all, something waits. Something that has been growing, feeding, preparing. The pattern of the infection, when mapped across London, creates a perfect replica of the structures I've observed in my samples. We are not dealing with a mere disease. We are dealing with something that thinks, that plans, that has been waiting in the earth since long before humans walked upon it. I've discovered references in ancient texts to similar outbreaks throughout history. The Black Death wasn't the first manifestation of this entity. It has emerged again and again, each time growing more complex, more organized, learning from each attempt. Today I visited the Whitmores again. The entire family is now infected, but they're not dying. They're changing. The fibrous growths have spread throughout their bodies, visible beneath their skin like dark rivers. They speak in unison now, describing the same visions I see in my dreams. They told me it's almost ready, that soon it will be complete. I must do something. But who would believe me? How can I explain that what we call the plague is merely the visible portion of something far larger, far older, far more terrifying than we could ever imagine? 3rd of June, 1665. Dr. Halsey came to my house tonight wild-eyed and rambling. He had taken my samples to study them himself, to prove me wrong. Instead, he found exactly what I had described. But he went further in his experiments than I had dared. He claims to have decoded the patterns, to have understood the messages they contain. What he told me cannot be true, must not be true. But it explains everything. The consistent visions, the coordinated behavior of the infected, the precise patterns of the disease's spread. We are not dealing with a plague at all. We are dealing with something that has been waiting beneath our feet for millennia, slowly building itself using human bodies as raw material. The fibers we've observed are not symptoms of the disease. They are its true form, a vast network that connects all the infected into a single growing organism. And now, after centuries of preparation, it's finally ready to. The entry ends abruptly here, the pen having skittered across the page in a jagged line. 4th of June, 1665, I write this in haste. They are coming for me. I can hear them in the streets below, not just the rats now, but the infected themselves, moving with that same horrible coordination. Dr. Halsey is with them. I saw him through my window, his skin rippling with those familiar patterns. I've hidden my research as best I can. This journal will go to my sister in Yorkshire, along with instructions that it should be preserved but never read. Some knowledge is too dangerous. The patterns are complete. The network is fully formed. Whatever has been growing beneath London is ready to emerge, to transform from an invisible web into something far more terrible. I understand now why the infected didn't die, why they changed instead. They were never meant to die. They were meant to become part of it. And now, I hear them on the stairs. The rats came first, hundreds of them, their eyes gleaming with an intelligence that should not exist in such creatures. Behind them, I hear the shuffling steps of the infected. To whoever finds this journal, burn it. Burn it and forget everything you've read. Some things should remain buried, some knowledge should stay hidden. The patterns are everywhere now. Once you begin to see them, you can never stop. They're in the very fabric of our world, waiting to be activated, waiting to spread, waiting to... The writing ends here, replaced by a series of intricate branching patterns drawn in what appears to be dried blood. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. I told myself it was just the ravings of a man driven mad by the horrors of the plague. But as I set it down, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on my wrist, where I'd been resting it against the page, was a small, dark mark. When I looked closer, I could see thin, thread-like lines beginning to spread beneath my skin, forming familiar branching patterns. I spent the next 3 days convincing myself the mark on my wrist was nothing. A trick of the light, perhaps, or an allergic reaction to the old leather binding. But on the 4th morning, I could no longer deny what I was seeing. The pattern had spread halfway up my forearm, dark lines branching beneath my skin like tiny roots. My medical training made it impossible to ignore the implications. The branching pattern followed my lymphatic system perfectly, tracing paths between my lymph nodes that I'd memorized in anatomy classes. But there was something else, something that sent ice through my veins. The pattern wasn't just following my lymphatic system. It was extending it, creating new pathways that shouldn't exist. I returned to Theodora's house, desperate to find anything else that might explain what was happening to me. This time I searched the attic methodically, checking every box, every corner. Behind a false panel in the wall, I found a metal strongbox. Inside were more documents, letters, hospital records, and most importantly, a series of correspondence between my great-aunt and someone named Professor Helena Blackwood, dated 1943. 15th September, 1943. Dear Theodora, I must thank you for sending me Aldrich's journal. As the last practicing physician in the Blackwood line, I've long suspected our family's connection to the Great Plague went deeper than historical record suggests. Your discovery confirms my worst fears. I've spent the last 20 years studying unusual disease patterns across Europe, focusing particularly on incidents that mirror the 1665 outbreak. What I've found is deeply troubling. The branching patterns Aldrich documented have appeared repeatedly throughout history, always in isolated incidents that were quickly covered up or dismissed as medical curiosities. Enclosed are my notes from a case in Prague, 1928. A young girl presented with what appeared to be severe lymphatic inflammation. Within days, similar cases appeared throughout her neighborhood. The attending physician documented branching patterns identical to those in Aldrich's drawings. But here's what truly terrifies me. He also documented instances of simultaneous movement among the infected. 37 patients spread across 3 hospitals, all turning their heads at exactly the same moment to look in the same direction, all blinking in perfect unison. The outbreak was contained only when the entire neighborhood was quarantined and dealt with. The official record lists it as a tragic fire, but that's not all. I found references to similar incidents dating back to ancient Rome. They called it morbus radicis, the root disease. The symptoms are always the same. The branching patterns, the coordinated behavior, the whispered descriptions of vast underground networks. I believe what Aldrich encountered wasn't an isolated incident. It was merely one emergence of something that has been with us throughout human history. Something that uses disease as a mechanism for... I hesitate to use the word, but I can think of no other that fits. Colonization. Your loving cousin, Helena. There were more letters, but what caught my eye was a folder of medical photographs paper-clipped to the next page. They were from various time periods, starting with grainy images from the 1920s and progressing to clearer, more recent shots. Each showed the same thing: patients with distinctive branching patterns visible beneath their skin. The most recent photos were from a small outbreak in northern England in 1981. The patterns were identical to what was now spreading up my arm, but it was the last item in the box that truly shook me. A modern medical report dated just 3 years ago, from a laboratory in London. Confidential. Project root analysis of tissue samples recovered from 1665 preservation reference. Blackwood collection DNA sequencing has revealed anomalous structures within preserved lymphatic tissue. Branching filaments appear to be composed of previously unknown organic material with several impossible characteristics. 1. Samples remain metabolically active despite 350-plus years of preservation. 2. Filaments demonstrate ability to spontaneously organize into complex patterns. 3. When placed in proximity, separate samples display synchronous behavior. 4. Electron microscopy reveals structures resembling neural networks, 5 samples emit low-frequency electromagnetic pulses at regular intervals. Note, after 72 hours of observation, samples showed signs of renewed growth. All testing suspended by order of department chair. Samples sealed in containment unit pending review. Update. Containment unit compromised, nature of compromise unknown, samples missing, investigation ongoing. Final note, project terminated, all records to be sealed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read the last page. A handwritten note from my great-aunt Theodora. To whoever finds this, I am the last of the Blackwood line to serve as guardian of these records. Our family has carried this burden since 1665, watching, waiting, documenting each recurrence. We thought we could contain it by keeping the knowledge limited to our bloodline. We were wrong. 3 years ago, something changed. The patterns began appearing again, but different this time. More advanced. The laboratory breach was no accident. It's growing, evolving. The network is rebuilding itself, using our modern understanding of genetics and neural networks to create something far more sophisticated than what Aldrich encountered. If you're reading this, you've likely already seen the signs. The marks will have started small, a branching pattern that follows your lymphatic system. Soon, you'll begin to notice other changes. Moments of lost time, dreams of tunnels and roots, the sensation of being connected to something vast and patient and hungry. There's so much more you need to know. About the ancient texts Helena found, about what really happened in Prague, about the true purpose of the patterns, but most importantly, about how they can be stopped. I've hidden that information separately. You'll find it when you're ready, when the patterns have spread enough for you to understand what you're truly dealing with. Look for the box marked with the root pattern, but be careful. Others will be looking for it too. Others who are already part of the network. Theodora. I set down the papers and rolled up my sleeve. The patterns now reached my shoulder, and as I watched, I could swear I saw them pulse ever so slightly, in rhythm with my heartbeat. But something else had changed too. Where before the marks had been random, now they seemed to form distinct shapes, letters almost. And I could read them. I knew I should have been terrified, should have gone to a hospital, called someone, done something. But all I could think about was finding that other box, about learning the truth, about understanding what I was becoming. Because somewhere, deep in my mind, in a place I hadn't even known existed until the patterns reached it, I could feel them, all of them. Everyone who had ever been touched by the root patterns, everyone who was part of the network. And they could feel me too. They were waiting for me to understand, to accept, to join. But first I needed to find that box. Finding the second box was both easier and more disturbing than I'd anticipated. My body simply knew where to look. As I moved through Theodora's house, the patterns under my skin would pulse stronger or weaker, like some grotesque game of hot and cold. They led me to the cellar, to a section of wall that looked identical to all the others. But I could feel it calling to me. Breaking through the plaster revealed a metal box, smaller than the first, marked with branching lines that perfectly matched the ones now covering most of my torso. Inside was a leather folder containing what appeared to be research notes, medical diagrams, and something that made my blood run cold. A series of brain tissue slides dated 1928 labeled Prague specimens. But it was the modern-looking USB drive taped to the inside cover that caught my attention. Theodora had prepared for whoever would find this. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. The first file was a video recording. Theodora's face appeared on screen, looking gaunt and tired. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 2 weeks before her death. If you're watching this, then the patterns have already started spreading across your skin. Don't bother trying to remove them. Surgery, burning, even amputation. The Blackwood medical records document every attempted treatment over centuries. The patterns simply regrow, following the same paths, always rebuilding the network. What I'm about to share with you is the culmination of our family's research, combined with modern medical analysis. Helena was close to understanding it, but she died before making the final connections. I've spent my life completing her work. The patterns aren't a disease, they're a communication system. A physical network connecting human hosts to something that's been growing beneath our feet for millennia. Each outbreak throughout history was an attempt to refine this network, to make it more sophisticated, more efficient. The Prague incident in 1928 was the first time it achieved simultaneous neural synchronization across multiple hosts. The tissue samples in this box are all that remain of that attempt. Under a microscope, you'll see that the branching patterns don't just follow the lymphatic system. They interface directly with neural tissue, creating new pathways between hosts. But here's what Helena didn't know, what we've only recently discovered through electron microscopy and DNA analysis. The patterns aren't adding something to our bodies. They're activating something that was already there, dormant in our genetic code. Every human carries these latent structures. The patterns just wake them up. The video paused as Theodora had a coughing fit. When she continued, there was an urgency in her voice that hadn't been there before. You need to understand this isn't an invasion. It's activation. Every plague, every outbreak, every instance of the patterns appearing was just another attempt to switch us on. To activate what's been sleeping in our DNA since before we were human. The Blackwood family, we're more susceptible than most. Something in our genetic makeup makes us ideal hosts for the initial stages of activation. That's why Aldrich was among the first to document it. Why our family has been connected to every major outbreak. I'm running out of time, so I'll tell you what you need to know most urgently. The patterns you're seeing on your skin, they're not spreading randomly. They're forming specific sequences like a code being written across your nervous system. Soon you'll start to understand this code. You'll begin to see how it connects to everything else. The tunnels beneath cities, the way diseases spread, even the growth patterns of plants. There are others like you out there. Once the patterns spread far enough, you'll be able to sense them. Some have been part of the network for years, generations even. They've learned to hide the marks, to blend in. They're watching, waiting for the network to grow large enough for... No, you're not ready for that yet. First, you need to see the rest of the Prague documents. They show what happens in the later stages of activation, but more importantly, they show what we discovered about the source. About what's been waiting all this time, growing beneath. The video cut off abruptly. The next file was labeled Prague Stage 4.pdf. As I opened it, I noticed something odd. The patterns on my arm were moving, shifting to match the diagrams appearing on my screen. My body was learning, adapting, implementing the information in real time. The document began with a detailed medical report. Subject 23, Prague outbreak, day 17 terminal stage observations. The branching patterns now cover 94% of subject's neural tissue. Brain activity shows perfect synchronization with all other stage 4 subjects. Autonomous functions, heartbeat, breathing, occur in perfect unison across all connected hosts. New growth patterns observed in deeper brain structures. Subjects report shared consciousness experiences. Memory transfer between hosts confirmed through controlled testing. Most significant discovery, subjects no longer behave as individuals. They function as nodes in a larger neural network, each brain serving as a processing center for what appears to be a vastly larger consciousness. Critical observation. This network appears to extend beyond the human hosts. Soil samples from beneath Prague show identical branching patterns extending at least 300 meters below ground. These underground structures pulse in sync with the host's neural activity. Update. Subjects have begun modifications to their environment. Working in perfect coordination, they are constructing something in the hospital basement. The structure follows the same branching patterns observed in tissue samples. Purpose unknown. Final note. Military containment ordered after subjects began converting organic matter into new growth medium. Method of conversion unknown. Entire facility to be sealed and... The rest of the document was heavily redacted, but the images remained. They showed cross-sections of human brain tissue with the familiar branching patterns. But these were different from the ones on my skin. More complex, more organized. Like circuit diagrams drawn in living tissue. The last page contained a single photo. A massive underground chamber beneath the Prague hospital. The walls were covered in branching patterns that glowed faintly in the dark. In the center was a partially constructed structure that resembled a human nervous system scaled up to architectural size. But what made me slam the laptop shut was the realization that I understood exactly what I was looking at. Not just understood, I could feel my body wanting to recreate it. The patterns under my skin were already starting to shift, to organize themselves into similar structures. Something warm trickled down my face. When I wiped it away, my hand came back red. Not blood, something darker, with tiny branching fibers visible within it. I could feel them trying to grow, to spread, to connect. The laptop screen flickered back to life on its own. A new document was opening. As I watched, text began appearing, written in the same branching patterns that covered my skin. You are ready to begin find the others. The network must grow, the structure must be completed. Below my feet, I could feel vibrations in the earth. Regular, rhythmic, like a vast heartbeat, or perhaps footsteps. I knew I should run, should burn the documents, destroy the evidence, try to stop the spread somehow. But instead, I found myself walking to the cellar door. Others were coming. I could feel them getting closer, their patterns pulsing in sync with mine. And deep beneath the earth, something ancient and patient stirred, ready to rise through its newly awakened network. The others arrived exactly as I knew they would, their footsteps echoing in perfect synchronization above me. I could feel their patterns resonating with mine. 5 distinct nodes in the growing network. As they descended the cellar stairs, I saw that they appeared completely normal, wearing ordinary clothes, looking like anyone you might pass on the street. Only I could see the faint lines beneath their skin, pulsing in rhythm with my own. "Welcome, brother," said a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen. "We've been waiting for another Blackwood to join us. Your family always produces the strongest connections." I found myself answering in words that weren't entirely my own. "The network requires a Blackwood to complete the next phase." "Yes," she smiled. "Just as it did in Prague. Just as it will again." But something wasn't right. As they moved closer, I noticed inconsistencies in their patterns. The branching structures beneath their skin weren't quite synchronized, showing subtle variations that shouldn't have been possible in a truly connected network. My medical training kicked in, and I began to analyze what I was seeing with clinical detachment. "You're not part of the network," I said suddenly. "Not really. Your patterns, they're artificial." Dr. Chen's smile faltered. "Clever, just like Theodora. She figured it out too, you know. Why do you think she had to be eliminated?" The truth hit me like a physical blow. "You killed her. You're not connected to the network. You're trying to control it." "For decades, we've been trying to understand this phenomenon," another member of the group explained. "We've attempted to artificially recreate the patterns, to tap into the network. But it never works properly without a true carrier, a Blackwood. Your family's genetic makeup is the key to interfacing with the deeper structure." The Prague incident wasn't a natural emergence, I realized. It was an experiment. You tried to force an activation. "An experiment that you're going to help us complete," Dr. Chen said. "Your connection to the network is genuine. With you, we can finally establish control over the entire system." They moved to grab me, but at that moment, something extraordinary happened. The patterns across my skin began to pulse with brilliant clarity. Information flooded my mind, not from them, but from something far older and vast. I finally understood what Aldrich had discovered, what Theodora had protected, what Helena had died trying to prevent. The network wasn't meant to be controlled. It was meant to protect us. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," I said, backing away. "The patterns, the network, they're not a disease or a tool. They're an immune system, a defense mechanism encoded into our DNA millions of years ago, designed to activate when needed." "Defense against what?" Dr. Chen demanded. Deep beneath our feet, something shifted. The vibrations I'd felt earlier grew stronger. "Against them," I whispered. The cellar floor cracked. Through the fissures, we could see deeper channels lined with fossilized patterns, ancient neural pathways that had laid dormant for millennia. But between these patterns were other structures, alien geometries, invasive growth patterns that bore no relation to terrestrial biology. "There's another network," I explained, the knowledge flowing through me from countless connected hosts across history. "One that's been trying to establish itself since before humans existed. Every few centuries it makes another attempt to take root, to spread through Earth's biosphere. The patterns we carry are our planet's natural defense, a way to detect and fight the invasion at a cellular level." "That's impossible," one of them breathed. "The Black Death, the Prague incident, every major outbreak, they weren't random, they were responses to attempted incursions. The network activates when it detects the other trying to emerge. Every plague was actually an immune response." The ground shook more violently. Through the widening cracks, we could see something moving in the depths. Something with its own branching patterns, but wrong, twisted and malformed, like a cancer of reality itself. "It's happening again," I said. "That's why the network is waking up. That's why it needed a Blackwood. We're not carriers of a disease, we're antibodies. Dr. Chen raised a gun. This changes nothing. We'll find a way to control both networks, the power they represent. She never finished the sentence. The patterns under my skin flared, and suddenly I was connected not just to the network, but to every instance of its activation throughout history. I could feel Aldrich's presence and Helena's and Theodora's, all the Blackwoods who had served as nodes in this ancient defense system. Acting on instinct, guided by centuries of accumulated knowledge, I pressed my hand against the earth. The patterns flowed from my skin into the ground, spreading outward in an exponentially growing web. Where they met the alien structures, they encapsulated them, just as human antibodies surround hostile bacteria. The others tried to run, but their artificial patterns betrayed them. The network recognized them as compromised cells and responded accordingly. I watched in horror as their pseudo-patterns dissolved, taking their cellular structure with them. They collapsed into organic slurry, their bodies converting themselves into raw material for the network's growth. Over the next few hours, I felt the network expand beneath London, seeking out and neutralizing pockets of the alien pattern. Through my connection, I could sense similar responses activating worldwide as humanity's ancient defense system came fully online. 3 days later, the incursion was contained. The network began to go dormant again, but I knew it would never fully sleep. It needs active nodes to maintain its vigilance, watchers to monitor for signs of the next attempted invasion. That's why I'm writing this account. Not as a warning, but as a training manual for others who might find themselves becoming part of the network. If you notice branching patterns spreading across your skin, don't fight it. Don't try to control it. Understand that you're part of something ancient and necessary, an immune system that spans continents and centuries. The patterns aren't a disease, they're an activation. A call to arms in a war most of humanity never notices. A war we've been fighting since before we were human. I still serve as an active node. The patterns are barely visible now. They only show themselves when needed. I monitor the network, watching for signs of new incursions. Sometimes I dream of the deep places, of alien geometries trying to take root in our reality. But I also feel the presence of other watchers, other nodes in humanity's immune system, standing ready to respond. We are the Earth's antibodies, and we are always watching. Final note found paper clipped to the account. To the next node who reads this, Dr. Chen's organization wasn't completely eliminated. They're still out there, still trying to artificially recreate the patterns. If you're reading this, they've probably already noticed you. Be careful. Watch for people with almost perfect patterns. And remember, the network isn't good or evil. It simply is. Like any immune system, it exists to maintain balance, to protect the whole at the expense of compromised parts. The patterns are spreading again. A new incursion is beginning. If you're reading this, you're probably already changing, becoming part of the defense. Welcome to the network. And good luck. We'll be watching for your signal. The salty air whipped through my hair as I lifted myself onto the bridge's railing. While gazing mindlessly into the rapid waves below, I rose to my feet and teetered slightly over the edge. My clenched fists trembled and dripped with blood I had anxiously drawn from my palms. I inhaled a gulp of air, savoring the pleasant feeling of full lungs while it lasted. I refused to look down, opting to clamp my eyes shut in order to avoid the sinking feeling that came with it. I had always been afraid of heights. The trembling in my legs began to intensify, making it nearly impossible for me to maintain my balance. I decided now was the time, opening my eyes just enough to gaze into the warm pink sky as I let my body relax and fall forward. My limbs flailed frantically as my feet neared the water. It was too late to regret it, but I did anyway. I understood now that I never wanted to die. I just wanted my anguish to halt. But what if the stillness I've been yearning for is emptier than the life I've been running from? The ice-cold water engulfed my body, and to my surprise I felt not pain, but tranquility. Realizing that there was no way to turn back now, I simply accepted my fate. One last time I closed my eyes and prayed that wherever I was headed was better than here. And when I awaked days later in a hospital bed, that prayer still lingered in my mind as if only seconds had passed. I sat up, a debilitating pain striking my gut and eliciting a loud groan from my lips. My jaw clenched tightly as I clutched my stomach. desperately attempting to soothe the agony which now began to spread throughout my entire body. I surveyed the bland room around me in search of a call button, a desperate attempt to inform the doctors of my crippling pain, though it was only a matter of seconds before my worries shifted from my physical pain, and my eyes started to well with tears as I recalled how I got myself in this situation in the first place. I had barely any time to process my sorrow before it was replaced by fury. I knew my chances of surviving that attempt were practically zero, which led me to believe that someone must have somehow saved me. I remembered the regret that washed over me in my final seconds, yet the thought of a stranger going out of their way to preserve my life still made me sick with rage. I shakily forced myself onto my feet, and without thinking rationally, I tore the IV out of the flesh of my forearm. The sound of my blood dripping onto the marble floor was audible as I reached to slide open the curtain. I stepped out into the narrow hallway and was instantaneously struck by the unpleasant scent of iron and must, forcing me to swallow a string of gags that threatened to spill. Slowly I began to descend down the seemingly endless stretch of walls, only able to hope I was headed in the right direction. I wasn't quite sure why, but with every step I took, uncertainty mixed with the rage pumping through my veins. I quickly determined that the only logical explanation for my sudden anxiety was the eerie silence that engulfed me. I was in the hospital a lot when I was younger, and I vividly recall the place bustling with people even during the late hours of the night. I found it odd that this place seemed empty. Finally, I reached the end of the hallway and was greeted by two sets of stairs. One led down and one went up. I determined by the labels that I was currently standing on floor 2, and so I chose to go down in order to hopefully reach the lobby. I felt nauseous as I reached the final step, finding myself gazing into a colossal room decorated with high-end furniture and costly paintings. This was like no hospital I'd ever seen before, and was a shocking contrast to the bland floor I had came from. Though the size and quality of the room wasn't what scared me, it was the lack of people. I swallowed dryly as I spotted the man across from me sitting stiffly behind a tall wooden desk. He wore a white balaclava which covered his entire face, the only exception being two small holes for the eyes. It was just us, staring at each other blankly before the silence became too much to bear. Hi, I said, my voice unintentionally escaping as a whisper. Hello, Jade, he replied huskily. I furrowed my eyebrows in confusion, taking a subtle step backwards. How do you know my name? The legs of his chair scraped against the tiled floor as he slid backwards and rose to his feet. I gasped as he revealed the rifle slung over his chest, his gloved finger hovering impatiently over the trigger. My knowledge is none of your concern. You must focus and listen to me carefully, he began. My muscles tensed as he pointed the gun at me, and I reflexively nodded. If you desire another chance at living, follow my instructions. You have a limit of 5 minutes to find a way to kill me before this room fills with gas. His blunt instructions stunned me to silence, and I found myself paralyzed by shock and fear as I asked myself the vital question. Do I want another chance? I was well aware of the fact that I had nothing waiting for me back at home, yet I couldn't shake the glimmer of faith as I thought of a second chance at life. Your 5 minutes starts now, he stated. I stumbled backwards, nearly tripping over my own 2 feet as I frantically raced up the stairs. While I navigated the lengthy halls, I wondered how he expected me to find a way to kill him in a place meant for saving people. Obviously, this place wasn't a real hospital. I didn't know what it was, nor did I have the time to wonder. All I knew was that suddenly I found a will to survive. I barged through the first door I came across and began swiftly raiding the room, tossing supplies and machines all over the place. The room was filled with things such as pills, stethoscopes, and useless tools that seemed to hold no purpose. Fuck, I shouted, sprinting out of that room and into the next one. I repeated this process over and over again, growing more desperate by the second. 2 minutes remaining, a robotic voice echoed over the speakers. I briskly slid back into the hallway, my heartbeat echoing through my ears as I headed for a stray cart. I nervously bit my lip as I stared at the cup of syringes atop of it, my hand hovering shakily over them. I thought back to the anesthesia I'd seen in the medicine room, and I smiled quietly to myself as the realization dawned that if I injected him with just enough of the substance, it'd knock him out quickly without killing him. That way I wouldn't have to live with the guilt on my consciousness. 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining. I retraced my steps back into the first room I entered, moving carefully as I stuck the syringe into the vial labeled anesthesia and flooded the chamber. A fiery tingle in the back of my throat caused me to fall into an uncontrollable fit of coughing. I turned around and looked into the smoke-filled hallway, placing my arm over my mouth. My body, reacting on pure survival instinct and surging adrenaline, cut through the cloud of gas and descended toward the staircase. If in that moment I had stopped and thought for just a single second, I am almost certain I would have chosen to inject myself with the syringe instead. But for some underlying reason, an unfamiliar determination had sparked within me and embraced my emotional compass. A wave of simmering electricity pulsed through my legs as my sneakers found the lobby's ornamental floors. Time slowed to a drag, my eyes finding the terrorized gaze of the masked man who sat just a few feet away. Upon reaching his desk, I allowed my muscles to relax completely, my knees buckling in order to conceal my figure behind the object. 30 seconds remaining. Reluctantly, I stuck the syringe between my teeth, careful not to put too much pressure on the fragile glass. With newfound access to both of my hands, I slipped my fingers beneath the bottom of the desk and focused all of the strength I could muster on my upper body. I flipped the desk, effectively pinning the slender man beneath the wood. 10 seconds remaining. With the syringe in my right hand and the man's wrist in my left, I forcefully injected the needle into the flesh of his forearm. He let out a raspy cry of pain, his body tensing in retaliation to the abrupt attack. The game has concluded. Congratulations, Jade Fuchs. You may proceed to the next round. Nah, next round? I felt lightheaded, a familiarly bitter taste coating my tongue as if I was going to throw up right there. Sitting in front of the beach, carelessly sipping my beer, enjoying the sunset. What a blissful time to be alive. I was in some next level of trance. Everything seemed so surreal, so tranquilizing. The amber-colored sun like a big fireball slowly getting swallowed by the vastness of the sea. The sound of waves like some melodious music, the occasional chirping of the birds adding to the effect. The rising waves were touching my legs at a regular interval like some natural therapy. I was bothered about the fact that why none of my problems were bothering me, how come life was so peaceful suddenly. I did not have any idea how I reached this place, which is amazingly beautiful. I was practicing mindfulness at its best, completely living in the present, no thoughts of past or present. Then I saw her outline darkened by the sun rays coming from the opposite side. But her body, her hair, her hands, everything about her was so deeply engraved in my mind that I could recollect her from anywhere. She can't be here. She is miles away from me, in a different city, happy with her husband, I told myself. This person is someone else. My mind is hallucinating. My mind justifying the position of being my greatest enemy is playing trick on me. My mind who can't stand me being happy even for some minutes. My jealous, wicked, evil mind who, after failing to bring any regrets of past or any worries of future, bringing the image of many of my sorrow in front of me to win this contest. Swing, I started cursing my mind mentally. The figure started coming close. She was wearing the same shiny red dress she wore in the college farewell party. Crazy coincidence after all that happened between us. The drama and the bitter parting away. No conversations, not even the formal birthday wishes exchanged from last 10 years, and yet I found her slowly approaching me in the same dress. She looked the most spectacular once. A part of me who craved her so much was becoming heavy again. I forcefully brought all the negative thoughts back in mind to end this mental coup. Life has changed so much since we last talked. From my menial job, which was too small for us, and from my unknown college, I got into a high-paying job after doing my MBA from a fancy college. She got married in between. She didn't invite me, and I was glad I was not asked to come because had I gone there, either I would have surely created some drama to vent out my frustration, or I would have gotten lost between the thoughts of self-pity and why life is so unfair to me. We were still friends on social media, though. That is how I got to know about her marriage. I rarely talked to our common friends. I didn't want even a shade of her involvement in my new life. A life I created for myself, where I'm successful, powerful and happy at least superficially, and not the helpless me which she made me once. She was not very active on social media ever, and after her marriage she didn't post anything. I didn't care, though once in a while I did used to go to her profile to check if there is anything new. But I sensed her presence that day. As they say, the world is a small place. That day was 31st December, and I was enjoying my vacations in Thailand, a popular tourist spot. Many Indians go there these days. As they say, the ambitious middle class of India has shifted from Goa to Thailand. I thought maybe she had come here with her husband. A coincidence, a painful one. I didn't know if there is any antonym of serendipity, but if there is one, I was going through it. Her outline was becoming clearer and clearer with every passing second. This was definitely her, I was convinced now. For countless time during my college, I had wondered at her physical beauty. The way her hair moved with a passing breeze, amplifying her beauty so much that she looked almost like an angel who had come from some other world. How can anyone born on this planet be so beautiful? As I was getting deeper and deeper into the thoughts, with my past and present getting one again without any visible boundaries, and I was losing sense and the memory of what all happened in the last 10 years, there was a sudden halt. I was suddenly brought back in the present. Do you remember when you're having a very clear dream and then someone wakes you and you get back to your senses pretty quickly while still retaining the thoughts of your dream? I suddenly remembered that it was the 31st of December 2019. I was in Thailand and she was not here. Was I hallucinating? But it felt so real. I have always wondered, whenever I read the stories of people going through schizophrenia and other mental condition, how it feels to imagine a person. I guess I experienced it that day. Subconscious mind is indeed a complicated yet magical thing. It can bring back someone in front of your eyes, someone of whom you rarely think about these days. I threw the remaining beer into trash. Maybe the nature vibes with the alcohol had made me lose touch with reality for a while. Next 3 days were horrible. I was haunted by her thoughts again and again, as if I had never moved on, as if I never accepted my fate. I went through series of mental state, from self-pity to cursing her for my misery, from laughing at her new mediocre life to imagining the what if. I came back to Hyderabad on 4th January and I felt relieved immediately. Although I hated my job and the fact that I put in 14 to 16 hours a day, I knew my job will be my savior now. I would get busy juggling stuff, firefighting and bitching about the toxic work culture of my company. I would forget her soon. It happened exactly the way I thought. The villains of my present took the place of her thoughts, and I forgot about her completely. I woke up with a very dried throat, cold sweat coming from side of my head, and a mind spinning furiously. I had a terrible nightmare. I have had nightmares before, but none of them felt so real, and none of them had such lasting memory after waking up, and none of them made me almost shit my pants while replaying them in my mind. I was back to the same beach, same setting and the same scene. She was coming near me. I was having the same chain of thoughts like that day, and a strong déjà vu. Like I was not sure whether this is real or not, and if it is real, it felt like it is happening again. But this time she didn't vanish. She kept on coming close to me. She came almost at a 1 feet distance to me, and then she asked, "Miss me?" I was startled by the question. It's been 10 years. Why did she want to have a confirmation on whether I still think about her or not? I made my mind that I will say very rudely that I neither miss her nor do I feel anything about her. She didn't exist in my mental landscape anymore. I made an eye contact. Her facial features were slowly changing. They were becoming very aggressive. The eyes were getting bigger, some lines coming at temples. She stood so tall and her stance was so aggressive, as if she was ready to attack me. Her face was slowly turning red, violent red, as if reflecting some deep buried anger. Do you remember the scene from the movie Bhool Bhulaiya, where Vidya Balan argues with Akshay Kumar near a temple, and Akshay notices her change of expression? I felt the same. Her pupil became enlarged, and now all I can see was pitch black color. I was transfixed. I couldn't move. She was looking directly into my eyes, and I couldn't run. I couldn't do anything. I was trembling. She put a hand on my shoulder. I had never felt an icy touch like that. Then she came 2 inches away from my face. Looked directly into my eyes. I was able to see my frightened face in the reflection of those dark voids. And then she asked again in a very disturbing high-pitch echoed voice, "Miss me?" I woke up after this. The clock pronounced 3:03 a.m., the hour of the devil, as they say. It took me a while to become normal again. My heart was racing like an engine. My breaths were heavy, uneven, and very fast. The sweating never stopped. I went to kitchen and had some water. During the whole journey from my bedroom to kitchen, I felt like I was being watched. Someone was there, lurking in the dark corners of my house. It is said that whenever we feel we are being watched as evolution developed our senses to work effectively, especially in darkness, to save us from any predator attack. I was not sure whether my senses are working overtime, or my miserable life has finally broken my mental sanity, and I was hallucinating a lot. I discussed the dream next day with my best friend. As expected, he laughed it off. He teased me, saying that even after all these years, I was not able to move on from her. I searched for the meaning of the dream in Google also. All I got was some random shit about unfulfilled needs and desires, blocked expectations and stress. In short, no solution at all. A part of me wanted to visit a counselor or psychotherapist for some professional help, but then I thought maybe I was overthinking it. There was one random hallucination and then a random dream. Maybe the former was the cause of the later, just a random emotional phase. I should not give much heed to this. I felt loneliness was getting to me now, and I should think about getting married. For the first time in my life, I felt lonely and sad about me being lonely. For the first time in life, I craved for some companionship. Next few days went normally. I usually sleep the entire noon on Sundays. My life has made me an introvert lately. I have stopped going out with people. I just don't like being with others, or maybe I interact so much with people during my work week. It's better to stay alone on Sunday. I ordered a heavy brunch and then watched a movie and fell asleep. I woke up when it was late. It had become quite dark. There was no light turn on in the house and no light coming from outside also. Usually my room is decently illuminated by the lights coming from outside. Perhaps a power cut, I thought. It took some time for my eyes to get adjusted in the darkness and get some vision. Suddenly my mouth went dry and I got goosebumps all over my body as if electricity is flowing through my veins. In the dimly lit corner where some blue light was struggling for its existence. She was standing in the same red dress and with the same dark black eyes, watching me intently and angrily, as if she was trying to pierce my whole body through her gaze. "Miss me?" she asked again. My paralysis returned. It was real, it was happening, it was the reality, it was no dream. She started walking towards me while maintaining the eye contact. She kept on asking "Miss me" in a tone that was frightening. She came very close. I saw her illuminated by that blue light in the room. Her dress was tattered, her face was rough, dry and splitting from many places, developing cracks like dry clay. Her hairs were very dry and scattered everywhere. She had come to punish me for no faults of mine. It was her decision to reject me. It was her decision to move on from me. It was her decision to kick me out of her life. What was she punishing me for? "What do you want from me?" I screamed with all my might. She touched her head with my head as we used to do during college. Then she smiled. It was a very creepy smile, and then I had no memory. I opened my eyes and I was on my bed. I checked my phone. It was 9 p.m. The room was well illuminated as always. I slept for like good 7 hours. My whole body felt tired. Was it a dream again? It couldn't be. It felt so real this time. I was pretty sure it happened, but then I thought maybe my mind was playing games with me again. I was very confused. Should I discuss this with my mother, but then she will get unnecessarily worried. I thought of talking to her directly. That seemed to be the best solution. Thousands of thoughts were running parallelly in my mind. Just drop a hi, do a casual chat, nothing serious. This will calm my mind. Her ice-cold single-word replies will convince my brain that she is alive and still the same. It will move on, these thoughts will go away. I didn't have her phone number. We didn't have any common WhatsApp groups also. So the only place of communicating was Facebook, the medium where our love story started. It felt like a poetic justice that I was to reach out to her on Facebook for a much-needed closure. It is true I hated her for a while. Who wouldn't? After all those tall claims of how much she wanted me and needed me in her life. After those flirting, after spending so much time together. After expressing our feelings for each other. After so much future planning, being kicked out unceremoniously like that. I had hard feelings for a long time, but then I moved on. I had bigger and better villains in my life to give me a hard time, and I forgot about her. She became a blurry image in my head till that unfortunate day of 31st December 2019. I opened my Facebook, and surprisingly, she was online. Generally, she keeps her messenger offline. I opened the window. I thought on what I would write. I never used to write hi to her before, so it would be really awkward to write it now. Suddenly, the window flashed that she is typing. Again, too much coincidences for a day. What she has to say to me. My mind created hundreds of scenarios. But at least she is here. She is real. She is alive. There will be a normal conversation and this ordeal will end. Maybe I will share the dream with her and we can have a good laugh on that, like old days. We can have normal conversations. We don't despite each other anymore. It seemed like she was typing a really long paragraph. No message came even after 5 minutes. Yet it kept on displaying the typing message. I became frustrated after a while. Maybe it's a technical glitch. They used to happen a lot during early 2010, but haven't seen anything like that lately. I visited her profile. She had last put a post 5 years back. She was not tagged in any photo for last 3 years. I kept on browsing her older post and saw a message she had shared. I knew that post was about me when she had put it. It was a subtle jibe aimed at me, where she portrayed me as a villain, as a sadist, as a jealous and immature person who ruined our relation. My mind filled with a rage. I closed my laptop. I didn't care what she was typing or what she wanted to say. I even forgot my own purpose of talking to her. I felt intense anger. I punched the wall with all my mind and felt the sharp pain on my knuckles. Self-destruction is not always rewarding. It felt like the real her was as evil as that hallucinating, haunting version of her. After all she did to me, she still considered me as the villain. I who suffered daily because of her, and now I was the oppressor and she was the victim. It took me a while to calm down. I took some deep breaths. I opened my Jack Daniels and gulped it down neat like they show in the movies. It burnt my throat, but I felt better after a while. I made a civilized peg after that, then one more peg, and then again. I played some old melancholy music. I didn't know when I passed out into deep sleep, fully drunk and out of senses. When I woke up, my laptop was on and a song was being played. It was her favorite song. YouTube was also playing games now, I thought. I reached the laptop to shut it. I saw the screen. Facebook was still open, and her chat window was also open with 2 words written after our last chat there 10 years back. Miss me? I had reached a stage beyond fear now. Partly because I was not sure whether it was a dream or it was another of hallucination, and partly I was curious now what is happening. I replied this time with a rude block lettered no. As soon I entered the text, I received a video call from her. I turned it on. I saw not her pretty face, but the same disfigured, haunted face. She tilted her neck, took a breath, and then she said something that shook me so much that I dropped my laptop from my hand. She said, "I will make sure. You will miss me." It was 3 a.m. in the night. I was so scared I just left my home. I went to a nearby 24/7 cafe just because I wanted to be surrounded by people. Whether I should visit a psychiatrist or a priest, I was not sure now. I needed to talk to people about this. I stayed away even from my mobile because I was scared she will contact me from there. I had 4 coffees in the cafe and I stayed there till 6 a.m. I put my usual not feeling well, can't come to office message to my boss. I started scrolling my contact list to find the best person to talk to. My fingers stopped at the name of a common friend. She might still be in touch with her. I had no idea what to say to her also. She also used to be a good friend, but we hadn't talked for last 4 years except exchanging likes on social media posts. Should I discuss the events with her? Should I ask her to do a conference call to resolve everything? I had no idea what I will achieve from this call, but I felt a great instinct to call her. I checked my Facebook on my mobile. There were no conversations of last night. It just displayed our old messages years ago. A part of me was expecting this. I called the common friend immediately knowing she would be asleep at this time. She was not a morning person. She responded after a long time, still very deep in the sleep. I hadn't even thought of a good excuse by that time on why I was calling her so early. But she sensed the trembling of my voice and asked me what is wrong. She was always a sweetheart when it comes to helping people. I explained to her what I was going through in a single breath. There was a long pause afterwards. I thought the phone is disconnected. She said my name in such a grave tone that it shook me. She then asked me the date of my first such bizarre experience. I told her that it was the 31st of December, 2019. She paused again, but I could hear her breathing. She told me that my ex-girlfriend died on the same day in a car accident. The moment she uttered those words, I got a FB Messenger notification from her account with the same 2 dreaded words. Miss me? Jasper Moreau is a man in his late 30s, an otherwise unremarkable figure who blends into crowds and leads a life that many might consider routine. A quiet office job, a modest apartment in a mid-range neighborhood, and a few close friends who mostly only see him at social gatherings. He's the kind of person who could easily be forgotten in a room full of people, but there's something unsettling about him that few can pinpoint. Jasper's real obsession is with mirrors. It started innocuously enough as a curious habit, pulling strange faces in front of mirrors. A furrowed brow here, a dramatic sneer there. He thought it was funny at first, a way to amuse himself, but over time, the behavior became more compulsive. Jasper began spending hours in front of any reflective surface he could find. Bathroom mirrors, storefront windows, even the polished chrome of a subway pole. Every time he caught his reflection, he would distort his face as if trying to see something different, something hidden behind his normal appearance. At first, he experimented with exaggerated expressions, grinning maniacally, pulling his eyelids wide, making faces that would make a child laugh. But soon the faces grew darker. He started to notice a shift in his own reactions. Sometimes he would stare at his reflection, deeply entranced by the distortions he was making. He wasn't laughing anymore. The faces became unsettling, grotesque, an exercise in pushing the limits of what a human face could express. He found himself unable to look away, lost in the tension between his normal features and the contorted versions he could summon. There was a sensation he couldn't shake, a feeling that when he made these faces, he wasn't just distorting his physical features. It was as if he were unraveling something about himself, a self that existed only in those brief, strange moments. He even started to feel that someone else might be looking back at him from the mirror, someone he couldn't quite recognize, but whose expression seemed to resonate with a deep sense of truth. This person in the reflection, distorted and wild, seemed to know something about Jasper that he himself didn't. Over time, the obsession deepened. He would stop by the same mirror at different times of the day, testing how his reflection changed based on his mood. His face would look different if he was tired or anxious, or even after a long day of work. There was a feeling of power, and simultaneously a sense of horror in this ongoing exploration of his reflection. Jasper began to feel like his real self was slipping away, slowly replaced by these exaggerated faces. He wasn't sure if he was starting to lose his identity, or if he was discovering something darker within himself, something he had long buried beneath the monotony of his daily life. The strange part? No one else seemed to notice. He was just another person lost in their own little world. His friends had stopped commenting on his odd behaviors, chalking them up to his quirks. Even his family dismissed the bizarre habit as something harmless, a childhood phase that had lingered too long into adulthood. But Jasper was increasingly alone with his reflections. He would go home at night, close the curtains, and sit in front of the mirror in his bedroom, sometimes for hours, pulling faces, sometimes laughing at the absurdity, sometimes crying in a strange emotional release that he couldn't understand. It's as if for Jasper, the mirror became a portal, a gateway into understanding who he truly was, and a way to confront parts of himself he had never wanted to face. In his twisted experimentation with his own image, he thought he might be coming closer to a kind of truth. Yet, the more he stared, the more he feared what might eventually emerge from that dark reflection. What could happen if he pulled one face too many? It's a cold, dreary evening when Justin finds himself standing in front of a mirror in his small apartment. He's been at it for hours, pulling faces one after the other. His reflection is becoming an ever-evolving gallery of grotesque distortions, gaping, angry sneers, wild-eyed expressions of confusion, exaggerated smiles that crack and stretch unnaturally. With each new expression, he feels a mix of fascination and dread, as though the face in the mirror is no longer just his own. He's no longer simply playing with his features. He's pulling at something deeper. Tonight, something feels different. There's an intensity in the air, something heavier. The silence of the apartment seems to press in on him as he stands before the bathroom mirror, eyes wide, staring into his own face with growing tension. Justin exhales slowly, a nervous energy creeping up his spine. He starts with the usual, a wide, mocking grin, then a grimace followed by a fake pout. But none of them feel right tonight. Each expression seems more hollow than the last, and he can't shake the feeling that he's being watched. The room seems to narrow around him. He suddenly feels trapped, caught between the image of himself in the glass and the flicker of discomfort growing in his gut. He stares harder at the reflection, searching for the right expression to satisfy whatever dark urge is driving him tonight. His own face, normally familiar, comforting even, starts to feel foreign. Then it happens. Without thinking, his face contorts into something he's never seen before, something new. His jaw drops impossibly wide and his lips curl up at the edges in a sickening grin, one that stretches too far, too sharply, pulling at the skin around his mouth like it's made of rubber. His eyes bulge unnaturally, not in surprise, but in a distorted exaggeration of terror. They are wild, frantic, like they've been frozen in the midst of an agonizing scream, but the scream never comes. His face seems to tear itself apart, muscles twitching in ways that shouldn't be possible. He can feel his cheeks quiver, his eyes watering, but he can't stop. He's locked into the reflection. It's as if his skin is splitting, stretching thin over the raw, exposed horror beneath. The face in the mirror doesn't just look grotesque. It looks wrong, like something other. Not a human expression, but a raw, primal thing that shouldn't exist. For a split second, Justin feels as though his reflection is alive. His own body seems detached from the grotesque figure in the glass, as if the reflection is mocking him, pulling at the core of who he is. He's no longer looking at himself, but something darker, more primal, something twisted and distorted. He freezes. The seconds stretch out. He can't look away, but now he doesn't want to. Then an unsettling thought creeps into his mind. What if this isn't just a face? What if this is the real me? The thought sends a shiver down his spine. The grotesque face in the mirror suddenly seems to move. It shifts slightly as if responding to his thoughts. The grin widens just a little more. The eyes narrow, and for the briefest moment, Justin feels as though the reflection knows him better than he knows himself. With a gasp, Justin steps back from the mirror, blinking rapidly as the image dissipates. His heart races. He rubs his eyes, trying to convince himself it was just a trick of the light, a distortion caused by his own tension. But the image lingers. It's still there, haunting the edges of his vision like a shadow clinging to his thoughts. For the first time, Justin feels a deep, unsettling fear. A fear of what he's been unlocking with each new face he pulls and where it might lead. What if, just maybe, there's something inside him, something he's been hiding, that even he hasn't wanted to see? The air in the apartment is suffocatingly thick, heavy with the weight of the moment. His pulse still races from the horrific reflection he just witnessed. The grotesque face, the unblinking stare that felt almost alive. And then the sickening realization that maybe it was him all along. His hands are shaking as he stands in front of the bathroom mirror. His breath shallow, his chest tight. The cracks of the distorted expression linger in his mind, as though they've carved themselves into his very being. He looks at the mirror again, trying to process what he's just seen, but the reflection that stares back at him feels alien. He doesn't recognize the eyes, the jawline, the face. It feels as if the reflection is mocking him, as if it's showing him something that was always hidden, something unspeakable inside him that he didn't want to admit. His hands curl into fists, and the frustration grows like a pressure cooker inside his chest. How could this happen? How could this one moment, this one disgusting face, shatter his sense of self? He steps closer to the mirror, almost as if drawn to it, his eyes locked on his reflection, filled with an almost uncontrollable rage. His chest heaves with the struggle to keep his composure, but the tension is unbearable. Every inch of him feels wrong, every breath coming out jagged, every thought spiraling. Why is it like this? He wonders. Why do I feel like I'm losing my mind? He doesn't know when it happens. One moment he's just staring, his eyes wide with growing anxiety and confusion. The next, he's lunging forward, fist raised high, and then the punch. The impact is sudden, violent, a sharp crack as his fist collides with the glass. The mirror shatters instantly, the sharp, jagged edges of the glass splintering outward in a spider web of cracks, like a cascade of broken promises. Justin stumbles back as shards of glass fall to the ground, the sharp edges glinting in the dim light. His knuckles burn from the blow, the pain immediate, raw, but it feels good. It feels like a release. His reflection is gone, shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, and with it, the part of him that had been staring back at him so unsettlingly. But even as the glass falls to the floor, Justin's heart races faster. The satisfaction of breaking the mirror doesn't last. He looks at his hand, blood trickling from the knuckles where the glass had cut him. The stinging sensation is oddly calming at first, but then it hits him. The mirror is gone, but the feeling lingers. The oppressive, suffocating feeling that something dark still watches him from the shards scattered across the floor. He bends down, his fingers brushing over the broken glass, as if looking for something. For what? An answer? A sign? He doesn't know. The pieces of the shattered mirror reflect not just his bloodied hand but also his disheveled face, now fractured into multiple versions of himself, each one reflecting a piece of the chaos inside him. For a moment he's motionless. His breath is shallow, uneven. The sense of release that the punch had promised is quickly evaporating, replaced by something else. The mirror's destruction had been a violent way to rid himself of the face he'd seen, but now it feels like he's only left with fragments of himself, broken and scattered on the floor. The voice in his head grows louder. You thought destroying it would fix you. You thought breaking the mirror would make it go away. He steps back, his chest heaving as the enormity of what he's done begins to settle in. The blood on his hand, the shattered pieces of glass, all of it suddenly feels meaningless, futile. The mirror was just the surface. What if the real crack, the real shattering was inside him all along? My family is Georgian American, at least from my mom's side. Every summer we'd go from my hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to my mom's childhood house in Samtredia, a town in the Imereti region of western Georgia, to spend the summer with our relatives there, primarily my grandmother, aunt, and uncle. In the past, we visited thrice a year, once on New Year, then during Easter, and then in June for summer vacation. This time, due to my dad's complications with work, we had to go a bit later in July. It was 2014, I was around 11 at the time, and my family and I had just landed in the Kutaisi International Airport. We were outside of the airport waiting for my uncle to pick us up. He married my aunt when I was around 9 years old and has been someone our family relied on ever since. My father and he got along fairly well. We had to wait for a while for him to arrive, and while we were waiting for him, my mom noticed that my little brother, Andrea, wasn't with us. She quickly began looking around, trying to find him, and thankfully, having avoided a potential panic attack, he was a couple of feet away from us by the sidewalk, kneeling and looking at something on the road. She sighed out of relief and nudged my shoulder. "Luca, go get your brother," she told me. "Why? Why don't you go get him?" I was somewhat frustrated at my mother for telling me to do something she could have easily done herself, but looking back at it now, she was obviously fatigued from the trip and even felt nauseous when we initially arrived. So I couldn't blame her for telling me to get him when he was right there. "Come on, is it really that difficult?" she replied to me with a drowsy expression. "Well, fine," I said, noticing that she was tired, I don't know why, but there was a strange absence of life outside of the airport. Normally you'd see people coming and going by car, but there wasn't a whole lot of that. There were cars out, but they merely stood still like effigies frozen in time. The world felt so empty that even though my parents were directly behind me, I felt alone and kind of sad. Most of this could have been chalked up to jet lag messing with my brain. This feeling was immediately broken by the time I walked up to my brother, who was looking down at the ground with such revulsion and curiosity that could only be matched by someone discovering pornography for the first time. "Hey, come on, get up." I tapped his shoulder. "Uncle's gonna be here any second. Look." He pointed at whatever he was looking at. "Huh?" I looked down to see a snail crawling along with the squashed corpse of another snail. The corpse was directly in front of the living snail, and it kind of looked like he was moving toward it, which felt extremely macabre to my 11-year-old self. "Kinda sad, isn't it?" Andrea looked up at me. He was only a year younger than me, but a lot of seemingly weird things captivated him. He often played around with plastic bags, ate his boogers, and even bit his nails to pass the time. Both of us had some neurodivergent tendencies, and I even got diagnosed with ADHD and OCD later in life. So I shared some of his tics and his tenacity for odd behavior. I didn't say anything to Andrea's question, but the sight of a snail crawling over to the corpse of another gave me thoughts that were not only unpleasant, but also horrific to someone of that age. I've always been an extremely imaginative kid, and due to my, then undiagnosed OCD, I'd often have thoughts or images pop into my head that made me feel uncomfortable. In this case, I had thoughts that pertained to the corpse belonging to the snail's lover, relative, or friend. Thankfully, before my brain could make me think of something similar happening to me, the sound of a car horn came blasting from my left. Our uncle had arrived. I grabbed my brother's arm and pulled him up. The two of us walked over to our parents and got into our uncle's car. "Luca, Andrea, how are you guys?" Our uncle greeted us with an obvious Imeretian accent, an accent that I and Andrea would often try to emulate whenever we came to Samtradia. To me, raised to speak in proper Georgian, it sounded like how a southern accent would sound to any American raised north, which I and Andrea were. "We're fine, how are you, Uncle Tomas?" Andrea said. The dialogue between the two of us was as flat as it could get between a man and his wife's nephews. We loved our uncle and all, but there wasn't really much conversation to be had between two American-born children whose only ties to their home country were through knowing the language, along with a few vague cultural details, and a man who hadn't even stepped a single foot outside of his home country. My father, though, who knew Georgian quite well for an American of Irish descent, had loads to talk to my uncle about. The two of them were as close as two sons-in-law could get, and basically talked the entire way home. I didn't listen to their conversation, though I did overhear my uncle mentioning something about how two houses around the area got broken into and resulted in the deaths of 4 people. What happened? Curious, I poked my head behind the driver's seat. Nothing that concerns you. My father tried to shoo me away before being cut off by my uncle. What happened was that one house got broken into in a calcifili and the guy living there, he was old, got killed. The second break-in happened in Samtradia, fortunately not anywhere near us, and an old lady and her 2 sons were murdered. I didn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. My uncle's blunt, no-holds-back response just kind of left me shocked. I pulled away from the driver's seat and sat down, looking out of the window to somehow forget about what my uncle said. As I mentioned before, I was a highly imaginative kid, and this talk of some random serial killer breaking into people's houses and killing people immediately made me think of the worst-case scenario. It also didn't help that I saw a snail possibly grieving over the death of its friend's squashed corpse, which sent my fear-induced OCD into hyperdrive. Against my will, a what-if scenario kept popping up in my head, where some crazy maniac broke into our house and started murdering every one of us. A particularly shocking scene included me getting stabbed in the throat with a sharp knife. I quickly moved my arm to my neck, something I usually did when it felt sensitive, and began to pinch and massage it. I did this to calm down and to forget about the scenario my mind conjured up. I didn't want to freak out in the car about it, since I didn't want to be perceived as a crazy cuckoo by my uncle and my dad, who were uneducated on neurodivergence and mental health in general. After around a 45 to 50-minute drive, I honestly can't remember how long the drive itself took, we finally arrived at our destination, that being my mother's childhood home. Typically it would be hot this year around in Samtradia, but due to it having rained so recently, the air was a bit chilly, which honestly beat the scorching heat you'd often have to face in western Georgia during the summer. I got out of the car and went to greet my grandmother, who was in the kitchen baking some khachapuri. I was the first one to get out of the car and run to the back of the house. I crouched down and silently approached the back door, which also led to the kitchen, and opened the door, shouting, "Boo!" to my grandma. After having scared her for a second, she quickly ran over to me and hugged me. The rest of my family arrived by the front door and were greeted by my aunt, who I also jump-scared. My grandma and my mom set the dinner table, and my aunt brought out some food for the whole family to eat. Me and my brother ate some of it, but we weren't exactly hungry. Jet lag often does that to you, much to my grandma's dismay. How my parents were hungry was beyond me. My brother and I went outside to get some fresh air. I often got overwhelmed when there were too many people in a single room, especially if the room in question was small. The living room kind of was. My brother would often follow me around when he was younger, so it was obvious he'd come outside with me when I didn't feel comfortable enough in the living room. I don't know why it bothered me so much. It still kind of does. But I always felt like I was being suffocated and squashed by the mere presence of multiple people in a small room. Their laughs, their odor, it all overwhelmed me, and I needed a break of some sort. When me and my brother got outside, we heard 2 familiar voices calling our names. We turned around to see that the voices belonged to David and Georgie, 2 neighbors who we often hung out with when we visited our family in the summer. They lived right next to my mom's family, so they probably heard that we were going to be visiting from either my aunt or their parents. We greeted one another and asked how they were doing. We got along fairly well, especially since our personalities complemented one another. David was the oldest, and he was more often than not seen as a leader. I considered myself to be the co-captain, whereas Georgie and Andrea were the underlings who always listened to the 2 of us. Amidst our conversation, Georgie suggested that the 4 of us should go biking along the trail in front of our houses. My uncle bought 2 bikes for me and Andrea to use, and they often sat in his shed not being used until that one time when me and Andrea would visit. They weren't exactly much compared to the bikes we had in America. My mom refused to bring them for whatever reason, but they were decent enough. We agreed and ran to our uncle's shed to bring out the bikes. After a couple of minutes, the 4 of us were riding our bikes along the asphalt road that was in front of our houses. To give some context, our houses were located in a neighborhood that was in front of a railroad. The only thing separating the houses and the railroad were the aforementioned asphalt road and a trench of water that me and Andrea called a mini river when we were younger. We had a lot of fun that day. We passed cows grazing, old men drinking and playing backgammon, and we rode our bikes until the sun was beginning to set. Andrea increased his pace and moved in front of David, who was the first in our little cycling row, I guess you could call it, and turned around, flipping us off before laughing and pedaling even faster. I chuckled and attempted to flip him off too, but I noticed that he stopped. David and I stopped behind him. Georgie stopped as well and got off his bike. "What's the matter?" Georgie asked. "Look," Andrea said, pointing at something in the distance. By the side of the trench of water there was a neat row of about 11 or 12 pine trees planted that covered the road in front of us in shadows. It was already somewhat dark outside, and whatever Andrea pointed towards, while not hard to see, was obscured by the shadows. Behind the last tree, there was a tall, skinny figure looking at the 4 of us. The figure, who appeared to be male, wore a blue shirt and black baggy pants. He had long black hair that covered some of his face, primarily his eyes. I looked closer, and it looked to me as if, probably because of the fact that he was so far away from us, but the lower half of his face looked featureless. My eyesight wasn't the best. I started wearing glasses a year later, so it must have been because of that. But Georgie asked whether the man had a mouth or not, so he must have shared my sentiment. David, who was the bravest of the 4 of us, got off his bike and started to slowly walk forward. "Hello, can we help you?" he shouted. No response. The man turned around so swiftly that it'd make you think he could have broken his back and just began to walk away. He didn't pay attention to us. It was as if we didn't even exist to him. The 4 of us obviously freaked out, thought it best to return home. We turned around and pedaled back to our houses, all the while occasionally glancing back. There was an odd sense of dread on the way back home. All of us were silent. The question of whether that man was the serial killer who had refused to leave my mind for as long as I was there. I wanted to say it out loud, but my lips refused to move. In the end, we all decided to keep silent about the endeavor without even saying a single word to one another. It was time to go to bed a few hours after we returned. Me and my brother slept in the same room, whereas my grandmother slept in the room above us. My parents slept on the 2nd floor. So did my aunt and uncle. Everyone in the house had gone to sleep, everyone except for me. I just couldn't sleep for some reason. I was tired, extremely so, but I also felt tense and alert, almost as if someone was watching me from afar. I would doze off for about 15 to 30 minutes before waking up again and looking around the room, but then I'd doze off again and repeat the whole process. The longest I dozed off for was probably around an hour and a half. I probably would have gone to sleep, had the sound of what appeared to be breathing waking me up completely. To give additional context, the bed I was sleeping in was a 2-person bed and was located right next to a window. The side that I was sleeping on was coincidentally below said window, a little bit to my left, but I was below the window nonetheless. When I woke up, I was facing my brother's back, and it physically couldn't have been him. The breathing was not only deep and more rapid, it was also coming from behind me. At that point, I was on the verge of pissing myself. I could have gone back to sleep, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I had to know where the sound was coming from. I made sure to turn in my bed as discreetly and quietly as I could without making too much noise. I was praying to God for there to not be a loud creaking sound, because if whoever or whatever was behind me heard me, who knows what could have happened. At least that's what I thought at the time. I slowly turned in my bed, making a slight creaking sound. I prayed to God that whatever was in front of me didn't notice me. I opened my eyes and saw nothing. There was nothing in front of me, which only meant one thing. The breathing was coming from outside. I looked up at the window and saw a man with long black hair and a cartoonishly wide grin looking down at me. He had no facial hair, no eyebrows, and he was staring at me like I was a meal, ready to be dug into. He didn't blink once, and his smile looked like something that, at least to an 11-year-old child, a normal human shouldn't have been capable of doing. He looked like he wanted to hurt me. I immediately screamed at the top of my lungs. I tried to get off the bed, but I only managed to fall off and hit the ground. My grandmother came rushing into our room, shouting, "What happened?" "There's a man at the window." I pointed in front of me, fully expecting my grandmother to see a man with an almost demonic grin looking at her. But the man was gone. There was no one at the window. There was no sound either, no footsteps, no breathing, nothing. The only sound coming from outside was that of fireflies. My grandmother deduced that I must have had a nightmare, a point I couldn't argue against. I was only 11 years old and I wasn't very good at proving my point at that age. But what I saw didn't feel like a nightmare. It felt more physical and apparent. In most nightmares I've had, there was a certain feeling of intangibility or surrealism that cleared up the fact that it was a dream. But I didn't have that when I woke up and saw that thing standing by the window. It felt completely real. My grandma slept with us that night and tried her best to comfort me. I was paranoid, constantly looking at the window and at the corners of the room to try and catch the smiling man. But I couldn't spot him anywhere. It was like he vanished. After about an hour or so of constantly looking around, I finally managed to fall asleep. The man didn't come, and that at least gave me some semblance of peace. I had come to accept that what I saw was probably a dream or some sort of hallucination as a result of sleep deprivation. Those were the most rational explanations my 11-year-old brain could come up with. The following morning, I woke up to the sound of my grandmother screaming outside. My uncle and aunt ran out to see what had happened and heard their equally shocked expressions. Me and my brother quickly got dressed and ran outside to see just what happened. To my shock, I saw 6 beheaded chickens lying directly in front of the window that was in my bedroom. I was horrified, to say the least. My imagination was running wild and my mind was constantly attacking me with thoughts of, was what happened yesterday real? Did that man find us? Were we next on that man's list of victims? But then my uncle pointed out something that chilled me to my core. He said that the chickens' heads didn't look like they were cut off, but as if they were bitten off by teeth, human teeth. I then told my uncle and aunt what happened last night. My aunt called the cops, and they, along with my uncle and dad, spent a good few days searching the entire area. A couple of their neighbors joined in on the search for the man that they based off of my description, but they couldn't find anyone like that. The murders stopped soon after, and nothing happened ever since, which was a weight off of everyone's shoulders in the town. I spent the rest of my summer relatively stress-free and still continued to visit Samtradia every summer. I still do today. I'm 21 now, and in the 10 years that followed, they apparently never caught the killer. It was as if he ceased to exist, and while it is good to know that the murders stopped, it's still unsettling to think that he could still be out there, waiting to finish what he couldn't. I always wanted to visit the mansion between the hills. One day the opportunity presented itself in that my boss asked me to interview the owner, a rather quiet, withdrawn person. He will buy a major movie studio and our readers would like to know him better. On the appointed day I arrived. I parked my car. As soon as I left the car, rain began. It was windy and there was something off about the raindrops. I entered. In the first room I saw old paintings. In the second room I saw a large table, a piano, and all sorts of musical instruments. In the third room I saw 2 sheep. A butler was feeding them. I met and interviewed the man. We talked about art, the history of film, politics, war, peace, and companies, and on every topic this man had an uncanny knowledge. Then I left. On my way out, different than the first, I saw an ornate mirror. I hesitated a bit, but then I took it. It had beautiful diamonds. All was fine. The interview was published, and it was a success. I placed the mirror on my desk. I admired myself in it. Then things started happening. The rain and the wind seemed to follow me every time I left home. It rained for days at the time. I began dreaming of the man. In them he was angry. I took the mirror. My boss fell sick. So did a few of my coworkers. Then death started. And the rain didn't seem to stop. My boss died. I was struck with sorrow, but I kept telling myself it was a coincidence. I found myself gazing in the mirror for hours at a time. I went shopping when suddenly I was surrounded by dogs. They growled viciously. They revealed their sharp teeth. I hit one with my shopping bag. I ran. I barely escaped. One night I dreamt of the businessman I interviewed. I woke up. I heard my name being called. It was loud. I followed the sound. I grabbed a gun and left the house. I saw my boss in the street. He attacked me. I fought him. I shot him. As soon as I did that, he ran away back into the darkness. The next day, I became sick. I went to the hospital. It was empty. I saw a nurse. I asked her for help, but she laughed and told me I shouldn't have stolen the mirror. Then she started flirting with me. We were all alone. She insisted we did things. I refused. She began harassing me. Then I accepted. I followed every move of her lip. Why is this place so empty? I wondered. I followed the nurse across the hallway. She was teasing me. I was seduced. We kissed. She invited me to a nearby room. Then suddenly I shook my head and saw the truth. All around me, corpses littered the area. There were doctors, patients, and nurses, all dead, all with wounds. I backed off. The nurse revealed her sharp teeth. She began chasing me. I entered my car and drove home. The nurse was outside. I locked all my doors, shrieks and pounding. Then it stopped. It was all quiet. Not a sound except for my heavy breathing. Then I saw him. First as a shadow, then as the businessman I interviewed. I saw him slide towards me. Then I woke up in my bed. Was it just a dream? Something is wrong and I need help. The mirror is still there, but it no longer reflects my image. Neither does the one in the bathroom nor the one in the hallway. I can still use Reddit to reach out for help. The reality is that if you are reading this, then likely it's too late already. The cat's out of the bag, and the human population of our entire planet is in a tailspin over the truth I've decided to share. But just in case we survive tonight, I still feel it's time the truth is found out before this potential storm happens again. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Frederick Malvin, and I come from a long line of funeral home directors in Wisconsin. In fact, the very building I still preside over was constructed by my great-grandfather in 1922. If you think about it, you'll often notice that funeral homes are most often a family business. Let me assure you that this is in no way a coincidence or simply because the kids could never launch off from the nest. The truth is far more grave than that. Pun sort of intended. Let me explain. If you've read any archaeological magazines or online articles, you've likely seen some of the strange graves that have been discovered with steel cages and locks on them. Or perhaps you've seen exhumed 16th century bodies with rocks crammed into their jaws in a manner that leaves them useless if one were to suppose the being were still living. The reality is that these acts were perpetrated by those in my vocation and for good reason. You see, most people believe that the job of those who prepare the bodies of the deceased is to simply pump them full of a formaldehyde substitute and sell the families an overpriced casket. Yes, that is generally the case on a day-to-day basis. But our true purpose dates back thousands of years. Our true calling is to protect the living from the aftermath of what death does to some beings when they pass. Those cages I mentioned earlier, they were legitimately intended to keep the dead right where they were in case the unrefined procedures that needed to take place weren't performed correctly, as was the large stones in the jaws. They say there is a little truth in all fairy tales, and I'm here to tell you that's an absolute certainty. Vampires, zombies, werewolves, and even skinwalkers are all very real. Please stick with me here as I explain as quickly as I can. These beings once walked in large numbers among the general population. In fact, many of history's darkest eras were a product of these beings wreaking havoc on certain societies. There's many theories about their origination, but as professional, all I know is that the numbers and the bloodlines of these beings have diminished as time has passed over the centuries. Many people walking around today would never know it, but they just might be the great-grandson of a bloodsucker that terrorized London in the 30s, or their uncle might have been responsible for the increase in bear attacks in northern states decades ago. While these beings do still fully exist and terrorize our world, their frequency and power has diminished greatly today. But unfortunately, their blood is powerful and oftentimes lies dormant in your average person, and that's where I and others of my profession come into play. We are the guards of the grave, a society whose sole purpose is to oversee and monitor the decomposition of every human that passes, because sometimes those strong genetics break through in the process of death, and the being becomes fully converted towards that faint strain. In other words, vampires especially, are a very real threat to our society, and my job is to guarantee a stake to the heart or a decapitation at the first sign of the bloodline attempting to resurface in a past individual. You ever notice the large upswing in cremations? That's by no mistake. The reality is that we've been experiencing a larger volume of these outbreaks after death, so much so, to the point that a cremation eliminates a lot of sleepless nights and a low staffing that simply can't monitor all of the corpses as they settle. There was a time when our secret society had a universal record system that traced and identified the family lines that possessed these dormant genes. But the newest outbreak has defied even our records. We are now finding ourselves chasing werewolves down Main Street in the middle of the night with tungsten bullets. The silver thing is a facade. It's all about the hardness of the alloy. Because Farmer Joe, who never had a trace in his bloodline, escaped his casket before his visitation the next morning. Last week I took a shovel to the back of the head of Mrs. Greer, who had my cousin cornered in the embalming room and was attempting to mindlessly devour him. We cannot explain this upswing. Some suspect that something in our atmosphere, or in the food we eat, or even in the prescribed medicines we take is mutating, or even adding these genetic markers to our DNA. Others suspect it's more likely that most all of these genes might truly be possessed in all humans, and these environmental factors are simply setting them off. All I know is that thousands of years of research and practice has been found useless in the last few years as everything has been defying the odds. Another factor is the timeline. Ever notice that when great diseases or wars affect our world, that oftentimes you'll see great care taken in the mass gathering of the dead? This is because we often have 72 to 96 hours before we even see the effects of these awakenings. But in the last year alone, we've witnessed the undead rise within 24 and even 12 hours after death. To put it truthfully, we are all exhausted, understaffed, and fearful that our world will soon see another era of darkness if these beings rise amidst the populace again. This brings us to the last 2 days. On Friday evening, a young lady who had passed from an unfortunate wreck was brought in. Her ancestry showed nothing in our records, and we had experienced a high-volume deceased this past week. So the special area we keep the suspected undead was completely filled, so we places her in the general cool storage area. I was in the middle of cremating a suspected this vampire this evening, Saturday, when our in-house alarm system sounded. I sealed the chamber, grabbed my 10mm pistol and ran towards the shouts of my cousin Tim yet again. Except this time, I didn't make it in time, and what I discovered defied everything I thought I knew. The young girl was crouched over what remained of my cousin, and had half transformed into a canine-like creature, only she was still standing on 2 feet. And as she turned to look at me, she revealed the largest fangs I've ever seen. She was a hybrid. I immediately fired shots and felt that they had all found their mark, but they barely seemed to faze her as I retreated towards the steel doors to the storage area and initiated the lockdown system we had in place. I contacted my 2 remaining family members in the business and saw to it that the rest of the building was clear. That's when I heard more noises coming from that separate area. We kept the more certain genetically marked deceased. Like I said, we had an influx of deaths in our small town this week, and although I hadn't allowed one body to be unattended for more than 48 hours, as soon as I arrived in our security panic room, live footage revealed that 3 of the 5 remaining had awoken already. 2 appeared to your average flesh eaters, but the 3rd was also some type of hybrid flesh eater who also possessed fangs. I watched in horror as they fed on the other 2 corpses, with the fanged being taking a dominant stance among them, and exhibiting a strength like I had never witnessed in these beings as it began ripping door after door off of the storage drawers. That's when I decided to alert the central agency of what was happening here and call for backup. It took several minutes before I finally received an answer from a nearby town guard, who themselves had just battled 4 beings and was currently chasing another hybrid he claimed could fly through a rural cornfield. Within minutes after that, it became apparent on the central communication forum that countless funeral homes were under siege and over their heads. I decided the only thing left for me to do was to completely lock down the entire facility and let me father and uncle, the other 2 employees, know that they needed to look for help anywhere they could while I dealt with the inside. I still confident that I could contain the outbreak within the facility if I had enough time to strategize and pick my opportunities to dispatch these beings. All those ideas went out the door 5 minutes ago, when I saw a figure approach the door in the general storage area in the form of a bear before instantly transforming back into a humanoid. There stood my cousin Tim, already awakened, and he was punching in the door code. A couple minutes later, the special storage code was entered and the door locks released, and now as I write, the doors to my panic room are being rammed over and over by several creatures I suspect. I don't believe the locks will hold much longer. Run while you can. There is a memory I recall when the winds begin to shift, when the pleasant warm air of a North Queensland autumn teases its retreat, making way for the bitter sting of winter. It comes on hard, heavy, and relentless. Whenever I feel that crisp air making its way across the land, I am taken right back there. Let me take you back there now, back to 1999. How far is it now? I ask, seated in the passenger side of my brother's '89 model Ford Laser, a vehicle which had absolutely no business traveling this far out bush. I'm not quite sure. It's been a while since I was last out this way. We're looking for a very specific tree here. You'll know it when you see it. An old Y-shaped ghost gum just off the left of the road. Marks the turnoff to Flat Rock. I saved my game and shut off my Game Boy Color before the batteries went dead on me, and I had to restart from who knows how far back. Winding the window down, I took a deep breath in, getting a nice whiff of mid-July air. It was a cold day, and a few rain clouds hung overhead. That was a rare treat in these parts. Usually the summer months are our wet season, winter generally being cold and dry. I stuck my little head out the window, scanning the side of the road. With an audible sigh, I turned to my brother. There's no trees like that anywhere. Are you sure we're on the right? Before I could finish my sentence, Matt slammed on the brakes, pointing excitedly ahead. There it is, he shouted as my eyes fell upon the ancient-looking ghost gum tree ahead, its form splitting in two and branching out into a distinctive Y shape. I pulled my head back inside the car and wound the window up as the tires crunched onto the dirt road, and a wave of dust kicked up. And so it began. Another weekend outback camping trip. These little excursions make up much of the highlight reels of my youth. Nights spent camping out under the stars, swimming in the many water holes and rivers that surrounded our hometown, cooking homely meals over a fire, and of course staying up late and telling scary stories. Being winter, we wouldn't be doing any swimming on this trip, of course. The water reached almost sub-zero temperatures during these cold months, so unless you wanted an express trip to the hospital with hypothermia, it wasn't a great idea. After driving a little ways down this dirt road, we crested a hill, and I caught my first sight of Flat Rock. I wasn't blown away by it, to be honest, and in fact, kind of weirded out upon first sight. I had been to many of these spots and seen all kinds of varying landscapes, but this one was like nothing I had ever seen before. It was different, almost alien in its appearance. I can't even really sit here today and explain to you why it felt that way. It's just one of those things. When you break it down, everything seems normal. But the colors, the shapes, the layout, everything together seemed to formulate an image that simply did not compute inside the human mind. I recall noting how strangely pale the rocks were in this part of the river, compared to other stretches I had camped at. As we got closer, though, these odd feelings seemed to slip away as I got to see the place up close. We drove on down near to the water's edge, coming to a stop about 10 meters back from the riverbank. Excited for another fun weekend out in the bush, I sprung out of the car and started unpacking our things. Our swags first, then the cooking supplies, a little billy for tea, our bag of firewood, and finally the tent. We normally didn't use the tent, happy enough to just camp out rough in our swags, but with those rain clouds hanging overhead and threatening to open up at any minute, we thought it might be a good idea if we prop it up this time. I made a start on that right away. At just 10 years old, I was a pretty capable outdoorsman, or so I thought. Matt watched on as I scurried around tapping in tent pegs and hilariously jumping from side to side trying to catch stray bits of tent before the whole thing got carried away in the wind. He gave a chuckle before jumping in and helping me to finish the job. We got a bit of a fire going under a makeshift shelter and rugged up inside the tent just in time to kick back and watch the first trickles of rain start coming down. There we sat, looking out over the river as tiny droplets fell into the water, sending out little ripple effects all converging into each other to form utterly mesmerizing patterns. We cracked out the beers, ginger for me, XX Gold for my bro, and we just existed. It was out here that the both of us felt most at peace. We could let it all go and just live in those moments. We passed silly jokes back and forth, commiserated over our parents' divorce, talked about our futures, talked about the state of the world, the state of the universe. Hell, we could have solved the grand unified theory and not even noticed for how random and deep those conversations got. As the sun began to signal its descent beneath the mountains on the distant horizon, and the freezing temperatures typical of an outback Australian winter began creeping their way across our campsite, we pulled out the blankets and started getting cozy for the night. Of course, this is the part of these trips that the scary stories would begin. I both loved and hated this little routine. I've always enjoyed the feeling of being scared, or perhaps the thought of it, the idea of it. But actually being scared in the moment, that part was hell. I spent many sleepless nights on those weekend excursions, too scared to sleep for the rustle of a nearby bush, or what seemed to be footsteps around the campsite. Of course it never was, but that did nothing to comfort my imaginative little brain. I did my best for my part, attempting to scare my brother senseless with a tired old urban legend kids had been repeating for decades. He acted scared, but I could tell he was putting it on. As my story trailed off to an entirely unremarkable finale, a distant clap of thunder seemed to foreshadow what I knew was coming next. My brother reached over to the nearby bag of firewood, hurling another log onto the campfire, ensuring maximum immersion, I suppose. He then turned and stared at me, his face turning stone-cold serious. "Now look, before we put out the fire and go to sleep tonight, I need to tell you about something out here. Something that's actually real." I shifted a bit where I sat, rolling my eyes in anticipation of the coming supposedly true story, trying to mask the fact that I was actually nervous. I hated when the stories were true like this. If he was telling me about ghosts or monsters, I could somehow pass that off as nothing to be scared of. But when you're being told of something that's supposedly real, that's a whole other ballgame. "You heard the local legends of the big cats?" I said nothing, merely looking back at him with a curious look. He continued, "No, really. Back during the gold rush days, there were small colonies all over this land. People came from all over the world to carve out their chunk of the riches." I stared a little more intently now. That part was indeed true. This place was once the most populated city in the country back when there were fortunes to be made here. I still wasn't convinced, though. "What's that got to do with big cats?" I asked, trying to sound tough. The story continued on. "Well, see, when the Americans came over, a lot of them brought things with them. You've seen the cane toads hopping around, yeah? They were introduced to keep pests from attacking crop fields. Same deal with the big cats. When you're out here mining for gold, you don't want anyone coming near your property, you know, where you might be storing said gold, so they brought protections with them. Most of them dogs and guns. But some of the crazy bastards brought other animals. Bobcats, mountain lions, pumas even. Brought them over as cubs, introduced them into the acreage surrounding their farms and whatnot. But they're well grown up now. So are their kittens, and their kittens' kittens. To this day, many of them still roam this land, sustaining themselves on whatever they can find. That includes little boys and girls." "Shut up," I shouted at my brother. "Yeah, I know, I talk a big game. I love being scared and all that. But that part really got me. The idea that we could be surrounded right now by actual living monsters closing in on us. That genuinely frightened the crap out of me." My brother laughed and ruffed my hair. "Time for sleep, kid," he said, before adding, "Don't let the mountain lions bite." He gave me a wink before stepping out to douse the fire. I flicked on my portable nightlight, feeling quite grateful in that moment that I had remembered to put fresh batteries in it, and I resigned to read my Garfield comics for a while before sleep, trying to calm my now super anxious mind. Thankfully, with the soft trickle of rain on the tent and the familiar sarcastic antics of my feline friend Garfield, my eyes were unwillingly closing in no time. A few violent cracks of thunder, accompanied by blinding flashes of lightning, woke me up at what must have been, I suppose, just past midnight. I had never been frightened by storms, but this one, picking up in severity and our only cover from it being a four-man tent, I must admit, that got my heart pumping. By the looks of things, this one was damn close too. I fiddled around in the darkness, looking for my nightlight. I just wanted to not be alone and to not be in the dark. I was a little kid, I was scared, and I wanted to see that my brother was still there with me. If I could just see that, I could calm down and maybe get back to sleep. I fumbled around, feeling all around my roll-out bed. As I inched my way up the left side wall, my hand finally fell upon something solid, and I grabbed for it. My hand grasped around something, but it certainly didn't feel like my nightlight. As I gripped harder and tried to lift it up to my face to get a look at what it was, this object did not move. Weird, I thought, before fumbling around again in my search. Finally, my hands found the nightlight, and I flicked it on, illuminating the dark tent. I glanced back down to where my hands had previously been. Nothing. Nothing was there. But something had been. I had definitely felt something in my hand. I was almost prepared to pass it off as my imagination, when I heard a soft groan from outside, right behind me, just outside the tent. I froze in place, reality beginning to slowly click together in my head. Very carefully, I repositioned the nightlight to shine down to the spot where I had been certain I felt something. A trail, a noticeable indentation in the sand between the wall of the tent and its foundation. Such a mundane sight in any other possibly scenario, but in this moment right now, a sign of absolute horror. Something had been pressed into the sand in that spot moments ago, and something that very deliberately dragged itself away from that spot, a foot. Yes, it must have been, a foot belonging to some kind of animal. Oh my God, it's true, I thought. The big cats, they were hunting us. I knew it. Tears welled up in my little eyes as I listened to the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Deliberate footsteps, stalking around our campsite. Not just one beast, no, multiple now. At least 4 or 5. I began to call my brother's name in a hushed whisper. "Matt," I squeaked out, trying desperately to keep my voice down, but wanting nothing less than to be alone right now. "Matt," I called again, this time a sleepy grunt in response. "Matt, wake up, the big cats are out there." He slowly sat up, asking me what the hell I was talking about. "Shh, the big cats, they're in our camp." His eyes went wide now as he too heard the footsteps and those groaning sounds. He leapt across the tent, grabbing me and wrapping a hand around my mouth. I was struggling to get free, but he quickly turned me to face him, a finger pressed against his lips. "Shh, shh, shut up," he silently snapped at me. An audible silence, then more footsteps, walking around the campsite. Matt beckoned me to come close and whispered quietly yet sternly, "There's no big cats. I made that up." A cold wave of fear rushed over me as I realized the consequence of what he was saying. If this wasn't animals outside, what the hell was it? What the hell kind of foot had I touched? What the hell was walking around outside? Another flash of lightning suddenly illuminated the scene outside, and a loud crack of thunder overhead startled us. But in that moment, something became clear. It was only for a split second, but we both noticed it, and it caused us both to huddle under the blankets and crawl back as far as we could to the other side of the tent. Whatever was outside, it was walking upright. We cowered there, using the blankets as some kind of mental force field, as something inhuman stalked around outside, emitting noises unlike anything we had ever heard. I heard the same low groans as before, but I also heard strange chirping noises, along with some sort of weird backward gurgle. It turned my guts to hear it. There were definitely multiple of them, and at this point it became apparent that they were moving away from the tent. Matt grabbed me then and spoke in a whisper but very pointedly to me. "The keys are still in the car. Mate, if ever there was a time you need to trust me and follow me without question, it's now. I know you want safety, comfort, and answers, but I don't know what those things out there are, or what they want, so I can't give you that right now. But I can do anything in my power to get you out of this situation, right?" I just nodded. Honestly, I think the shock was too much for me to process anything anyway. We slowly unzipped the tent, and I watched as Matt held 3 fingers in the air. He lowered one, then another, then the last, and we sprinted. We ran for that car, faster than I think either of us thought we could. As we ran, I heard a very, very strange sound, one that has never left my mind. It was simultaneously the most absurd sound and the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. Gish, flop, gish, flop, gish, flop. Over and over. Not at any kind of fast pace, no. In fact, I recall being surprised at the time, as I expected to hear rapid footfalls right on our tails, but we didn't. Just that flopping noise over and over. We reached the car and we quite literally threw ourselves into it. I frantically slammed down the door locks while Matt struggled to get the key into the ignition. Finally, the key made it in and he turned it over. Click, 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 nothing. He made multiple attempts, but the damn car would not start. We silently looked at each other, defeated, and then slowly lifted our heads to the front windscreen, as the same thing caught our peripheral vision. Ksh, flop, ksh, flop, ksh, flop. Slowly they approached, before coming to a standstill in a group before us. 6 of them. My tears fell freely now. What stood in the darkness ahead of us was disgusting. Tall, slender, pale things. One of them stepped closer, approaching Matt's side of the car. It just walked into the car. Like a mindless drone of some sort, walking 2 steps forward, hitting against the driver's side door before stepping back again. And over it went. After a few repetitions of this, it raised a hand and began trailing its fingers slowly up and down the glass. My heart froze in my chest as another approached my side of the car and did the same, sliding its hands up and down the door, occasionally lowering its head to look through at me, making those weird chirping, gurgling noises. I covered my ears, not wanting to hear the sounds. My eyes stayed locked ahead on the rest of them. I could not stop fixating on what I had touched earlier in the night. Those feet, those disgusting flat feet, elongated like a duck but without the webbing and bigger. Pale too, much like the rest of them. And the eyes. Have you ever stared at an owl? It's creepy, right? You can only look for so long before you get the strangest feeling come over you, like you're being watched by something that is entirely wrong. Suddenly, from elsewhere in the darkness, an almighty cry echoed through the night, and each one of these things snapped their necks around to look at where that sound had come from. The two at our sides lowered their heads slowly, glaring through the windows at us, those owl-like eyes piercing through us. They stared long and hard for about 10 seconds before they walked back to the rest of the group and began walking away toward where that sound had come from. Ksh, flop, ksh, flop, ksh, flop. My brother tried the car again, to no avail. The engine just continued helplessly clicking, to no desirable outcome whatsoever. Ksh, flop, ksh, flop, ksh, flop. I remember crying very loudly now, confused, not knowing if they were really leaving or if they were going to come charging back to get us. My tiny little child brain had no idea what to think. I recall my brother's hand gripping my shoulder, followed by a giant flash of light, and the most earth-shattering thunderclap I have ever heard or probably will ever hear. And then, the land was silent once again. No cries, no rain, no storm. Everything was calm. They were gone. Those awful things were gone. I looked up at my brother to see he too had a look of absolute sheer horror on his face, and his eyes were far from dry. That is the last time I ever remember seeing my brother shed tears. Shaking, his hand struggled to grasp the keys once again, and he turned the engine over. It roared to life, which may still to this day be the most amazing sound I have ever heard. We did not waste time. We didn't grab the rest of our gear, to hell with that. No, we just floored it. We floored it back down that dirt road, floored it past that ancient ghost gum, and floored it all the way back down the highway into town. I suppose this might be the part of the story where you expect some neat little summary, some explanation of what I saw that night. Well, I would imagine you may have gathered that I cannot give you that. In fact, this is actually the first time I have felt confident enough to revisit the memory of that terrible night. One day I may look deeper into it, search a little more extensively for answers. But for now, you know as much as I do. I don't know if we encountered some ancient beast or spirit, or an alien species from another planet. All I can tell you is that I saw something not of this world that night, something my brother and I came to refer to as the Flatfoots. Among all the mysteries of that night, however, the most troubling unanswered question this whole experience left me with is simply the knowledge that these things actually exist. As a young child, I could pass off scary stories as nothing to truly be afraid of. But having come face to face with true horror, you come to question what else might be lurking. What other unearthly beings could be hiding in plain sight, concealed within the trees, or in the storm clouds underneath the waters, or much closer to home? How many of these things actually exist and are just waiting for darkness to fall? I'm writing this down because I want to leave something behind, some kind of testimony, because I don't know what's going to happen to me. Please forgive any formatting errors. I'm typing this on my phone. I want you to understand, so that's why I'm telling the whole story from start to finish, or at least where I think it all started. I don't know what's happening to me, or whether I'm still even here. Maybe this will help someone, if they encounter the same thing I did. Whatever you do, if you see the tower, stay away. Back in the summer of 2024, my dad and I were out walking the South Downs in the UK. We've done a variation of this walk a good number of times. We normally have a fixed route, go up a particular road, turn right, walk past an old Iron Age fort, then loop back. It's about 4 miles in all across slightly hilly terrain. This time around, we decided to turn left. We don't normally go this way because, honestly, it always seemed like a more boring route. Why would you go on the route that doesn't include an Iron Age fort after all? Anyway, We started along this new route, and for a while the walk was pretty boring. We were walking an exposed ridgeline, getting buffeted by wind, and the view was no better or worse than our normal route. Still, we kept going. We were both desperate for some fresh air, and actually ended up walking further than normal. I think maybe 3 or 4 miles in a single direction, before we started to think about turning back. There were rain clouds on the horizon, and we'd be retracing our steps as there was no way to turn this walk into a loop without having to go along main roads with lots of traffic. Besides, we'd reached a natural end to the walk. We were at the edge of the ridgeline now, looking out across a valley through which ran a relatively busy road. Across the other side of the valley, the ground rose sharply into a hill, topped with a small patch of woodland and a huge radio mast. We were able to look up the mast later. It's just a commercial radio tower serving the local area. Nothing military or weird. I'd guess the hill was a mile distant from where we were standing. My dad's a keen bird watcher and had brought along a pair of binoculars. He started looking out at the other hill and said something like, "That's a grand old place up there. Have a look." He pointed to the hill opposite and handed me the binoculars. I aimed them in the direction indicated and was surprised to see a very old red brick tower, partially covered by the edge of the woodland. It would have had a commanding view of the countryside below, but it didn't look military. It looked like it had been built in either the 1500s or 1600s, and was part of a church or manor house. It was difficult to see what condition it was in from where we were, but we were both absolutely intrigued by it. We'd looked at an old ordnance survey map of the area before, and neither of us could remember seeing any churches or major buildings on that hill, with the exception of the radio mast, obviously. We both love history, and seriously contemplated clambering down the ridge, crossing the road, and climbing up the other side to look at the tower. But as I say, the weather wasn't looking great, the road was busy, and we had a fairly long walk across bad terrain to get back to the car. So we agreed we'd go back the following weekend, park the car at the base of the hill where the tower was located, and head up to explore. So the following weekend, we walked up the hill, past a small caravan site, and past the radio mast, which was fenced and gated off, but it looked pretty boring. We couldn't see a path that'd lead us to the tower, so we had to go by memory and work out the rough direction we'd need to head. In the end, it involved walking through brambles and undergrowth, and thickest part of the wood, but we made it. In front of us was a substantial red brick tower, perhaps 25 meters tall, or around 80 feet for those of you who don't use metric. It looked old, maybe Tudor, so 1500s, and was partially ruined. We could see that the top of it had crumbled a little. From our angle, we couldn't really see the roof, but we guessed it must have fallen in at least partially based on the state of the rest of it. Having said all that, the rest of it looked well preserved, especially given that there were no paths to it, meaning presumably that no one carried out any kind of regular maintenance on the place. We walked around the base of the tower. It was square, maybe 10 meters by 10 meters, or 30 feet by 30 feet, and there were no windows on the ground floor, or first floor for my American readers. But there was one on each side from the second story up, for a total of 4 stories, including the first floor. We found a door. It was fairly large, a little taller than me. I'm about 6 feet 2 inches, and in surprisingly good condition. I'd honestly expected the door to be rotted or partially collapsed. It looked old, sure, but it was still intact and its hinges were solid. Looking at my dad, I shrugged, braced myself against the red brick door frame, and gave the door a shove with my shoulder. It ground open, the door catching a little, but we were able to go in. The first thing I did was look up. I didn't want anything to fall on my head. The floors above us had partially collapsed, and I could see daylight shining through a pretty significant hole in the roof. The place smelled damp and old, and, to our disappointment, there wasn't much to see. The floor was well-compacted earth and chunks of wood from the collapsed floors. There was no furniture. We took a look around. I snapped some photos with my phone of the interior, the roof, and the exterior, and we chatted about what we thought it had been. Our guesses ranged from a folly, a kind of mock castle built for decoration, but those had become popular in the 18th and 19th century, and this tower was too old for that, or part of an old manor house. But then where was the rest of it? Or an old hunting lodge? It definitely wasn't an old church tower. It didn't look right for that, and there was no evidence of any kind of religious decoration. We were about to leave when I spotted some graffiti by the door. Old graffiti carved into the brick, not sprayed with paint, which you tend to see here in England when you visit really, really old churches or other buildings. It was a circle, etched perfectly with a compass or chisel into the brickwork. Inside the circle was what looked like a flower, 6 petals emanating from a central point, each perfectly shaped and uniform in size. We thought it had to be graffiti because, and I don't know how we could tell exactly, it didn't look decorative. It looked like this had been carved a little later, and the way it cut across the bricks and mortar without regard for what looked aesthetically pleasing. I don't know. It looked unplanned, plus it was off-center from the door, and there were no similar patterns anywhere else in the tower. I took a photo of it, planning to look it up later and maybe reverse image search it. We left without incident and spent the car journey home theorizing about what it might have been. I remember picking red dust out from under my fingernails. It must have got under there when I braced against the bricks as I pushed the door open. My nails looked worn, more so than usual, and one hurt as though I'd bent it back without realizing. Clumsy. But I get like that when I'm excited. I was the sort of kid who fell over, scraped their knee without realizing, and only started crying when someone pointed out to me that I'd hurt myself. When we got back, we searched Google for information on the tower, looked up some old maps, and were genuinely bemused that we could find no sign of the place either online or on the old maps. That struck as being very odd. It was a big enough building that you'd think someone would have photographed it at some point, written a blog or marked it on a map. The radio tower was there, and so was the caravan site. There were photos of the hill taken from the ridge my dad and I had been stood on, but the brick tower was nowhere to be seen. I have to admit, even at that point, my dad and I were weirded out. England is a small country, and stuff like this is almost always documented by someone, somewhere. Honestly, my next step was going to be posting some pictures on Reddit. I was in the middle of doing so, in fact, when I realized the photos I'd taken were gone, as if they'd never even been taken. Nothing on the cloud or in my recycling bin. Nothing. I told my dad about it, and I think we both tried to reassure ourselves that it was a technical glitch, but neither of us was convinced, not really. Not after our fruitless search for the tower online. All this made us more intrigued than ever, though. Maybe the place had been totally covered in trees until very recently, and some recent logging work had revealed it for the first time in decades. That seemed like a reasonable explanation, and we decided we'd head back the following weekend with my wife, sister, and brother-in-law. We all like history and the outdoors, and the others would, we sure, be fascinated by the place. So, we went back, parked the car in the same place as before, retraced our steps as precisely as we could, and the tower wasn't there. As in, there wasn't even a clearing in the undergrowth, just brambles, undergrowth, and trees. We were sure we'd gone wrong somewhere, so we wandered, carefully together, around the woods as thoroughly as possible. Nothing. My wife, sister, and brother-in-law found it funny at first, and then got bored traipsing through the trees and asked if we could head back. But I have to admit, my dad and I started to feel a little panicked. My dad, who never swears, asked me, quietly, "Where the feffy fuck is it, Adam? Not my real name. Why can't we find it?" I had an idea. Let's drive over to the other side of the valley, where we originally saw the tower, and see if we can see it from there. So that's what we did. And there was still no sign of the tower. My wife, who had originally found this all slightly amusing, now looked concerned, as if she was wondering whether my dad and I were... All right, I was starting to wonder the same thing. We dropped everyone else back home, and I explained to my wife that I was going to stay behind with my dad. She said she understood. I think she knew that my dad and I had been rattled by the whole thing. I was grateful that she didn't think we'd made it all up. I'd told her about the photos, described the tower, everything. And my dad, who isn't given to bullshitting, had corroborated everything I said. I think she was a little unnerved by it. Whether because she thought we'd encountered something paranormal, or because she thought her husband and father-in-law had experienced some kind of shared delusion, I'm not sure. I don't know what prompted me to do this, but I suggested to my dad that we look up the carving we'd seen on the door. In England, it's not all that uncommon, in very old houses and buildings, to find the mummified corpses of cats or buried bottles filled with weird ingredients, intended to ward away evil. You can look this up, it's absolutely true. Remember, England had seen its fair share of witch hunts in centuries past. These beliefs went back a long way, so that's what I started looking for. I didn't really know what to Google, but after searching various permutations of witch carving evil ward England, I came up with a result that made my blood run cold. The exact symbol my dad and I had seen. A circle with those petals inside. It was called, apparently, a witch sign, and they were intended to ward away evil. Now, I've stayed in a hotel before that literally had a mummified cat in it. They had it on display behind glass and had found it buried under the floor years ago while doing renovation. I hadn't been scared then because I wrote it off as a relic of an old superstition. To me, it was a fascinating, if morbid, artifact, nothing more. But now, seeing this mark with fresh eyes, and having experienced what my dad and I had experienced, I shuddered. I called my dad over and showed him the result. The first thing he said was, "Well, they were able to take photos of those signs and they didn't disappear, so why did yours?" It was a fair observation. What was different about the place we'd visited? Was the sign just a coincidence? And to be honest, I still wasn't sure whether we'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the radio mast had beamed some kind of bizarre, brain-altering signal into our heads. But then it hadn't happened to my wife, sister, and brother-in-law. And besides, there was a caravan park right next to the mast. If it was making people hallucinate entire buildings, I'd imagine the people staying at the caravan site would have noticed. I spoke to my dad about going back to the tower again, but he didn't want to. I think the whole thing had shaken him up. I could tell the mental shutters were coming down. He was starting to file this experience away under "just forget about it. Thinking about this will lead to dark places." It was a technique he'd picked up over a tough childhood, and it was not a technique I was familiar with. For me, all that was left was curiosity. I asked my wife if she'd go with me, but she said no. There's nothing there. I think she was being protective. She could tell this had got under my skin and was trying to get me to leave it alone. I wish I'd listened to her, because from here things get blurry for me. You'll see what I mean. I left it for a couple of weeks and tried to take my wife's advice. I went to work during the week, we did chores and shopped at the weekends, saw my parents, and didn't mention the tower. But in the back of my mind, I kept seeing that sign and the tower. I kept thinking, was it really there? What had I seen? Was this all in my head, and if it was, did I need to see a doctor? So I did what every idiot character in a horror movie does. I went back alone. But to give me some credit, I told my wife exactly where I was going. I went on a sunny day at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, the 12th of August, 2024. I packed food, colored ribbons to mark my path, a torch, flashlight, a first aid kit, and my phone. I knew there was a signal up there, so that wasn't a concern. I also brought an old camera that belonged to my mom, which used film. I wrote a note in large lettering explaining who my car belonged to, where I was going, and included both my wife and my dad's phone number, which I left on the dashboard of my car when I parked it at the entrance to the woods on the hill where my dad and I had first parked. I thought I was being thorough. I got out of the car and started walking. I could remember the route, even through the undergrowth. I'd been thinking about little else for the past month. Even so, I tied colored ribbons to the trees as I went, marking my route so that I'd find my way there and back if I ever wanted to bring someone else. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, scraping myself on thorns, but I found it. It was there, just like the first time I'd seen it, unchanged. I almost wept, as much with relief as anything else. I hadn't imagined it. This place existed, it was real. I wasn't going mad. I took out my mom's camera and began to snap pictures, walking around the tower, taking photos from various angles. I tried to call my dad, but it went to voicemail. I tried my wife, and the same thing happened. I remember feeling a flutter of unease at that. The signal was good up here, and I'd told both of them where I was going. I had hoped they'd have their phones with them, but I put it to the back of my mind. They might both have been busy, so I'd try them again in a few minutes. I went to the door of the tower and pushed it open. It was the same as I'd first found it, the same smell, the same uneven floor. I took more photos with the camera and then, before I left, aimed the camera at the witch mark by the inside of the door. And I froze. The witch mark was crisscrossed with scratches and scrapes, distorted, almost to the point that it was unrecognizable, like someone rabid had attacked it. I remembered the red dust caught under my fingernails as we drove home, the nail that had been bent back. With a sick sense of realization, I understood that I had done this. I had no memory of it, none at all, but I was certain. This was my handiwork. I couldn't stay a second longer, I had to leave. The fact that I'd defaced that sign and not realized was enough to convince me that there was something wrong with me. I needed to speak to a doctor. I honestly wasn't even worried about anything supernatural. It simply terrified me that I'd done something like that and hadn't remembered it afterwards. I opened the door and stepped out into almost pitch-black darkness. It had been bright daylight when I first entered. I must have been in that tower for almost 10 hours, but it felt like minutes. I think I began to hyperventilate. I took my phone out to check the time. It was 11 p.m. The palms of my hands started to sweat, and my eyes began to sting with panicked tears. Something was very medically wrong with me, I thought. I had several missed calls, all from my wife. I called her back, and she picked up almost immediately. She sounded like she was angry and that she'd been crying. "Where the feck are you, Adam? Where have you been? Are you all right?" I tried to explain that I was at the tower, that it existed after all, but that I'd lost time and that I needed help. "How can you be at the tower? How did you even get there?" I didn't know what she meant. My mind was reeling. "I drove. I set off this morning, remember?" I reminded her. "Adam, that's impossible. The car is still in the driveway. It's been here for days. You've been gone for 2 days without saying anything to us. We had to call the police. We reported you as a missing person. Your parents and I have been worried sick. Your dad's been looking for you up that fecking hill. How could you do this? Are you okay? How?" She paused. I heard her shouting to my parents. They must have come over to our house to be with her. She sounded excited. "Adam, what do you mean you're at the tower? I can see you walking up the driveway now." The call was cut off by a screech of interference. I tried to call back once, twice, over and over, but the calls wouldn't connect. I looked up from the screen. I couldn't see anything. The brightness of the screen had killed my vision in this darkness. I fumbled for the torch in my rucksack and switched it on. I believe I screamed aloud. Every single tree around me had a ribbon tied around it. Dozens, hundreds of trees, each with a ribbon. The brambles rose thick around the tower. I couldn't see where I had come from, where the route back began or ended. I stumbled into the undergrowth, reaching out to touch the trees and the ribbons, as if proving to myself that they were real. I grasped a bramble with my hand, hard enough to draw blood. I did it, I think, simply to convince myself that this was real. I walked through the undergrowth for hours. I wept. I was lost, physically, mentally. I didn't know anymore. I tried to walk in a straight line. The woods weren't large, an acre at most. I figured I'd reach the edge in just minutes, but the edge never came. Instead, hours later, I found myself back at the base of the tower. My torch flickered. The battery must have been getting low. I slumped down beside the door of the tower, and here I still am, typing all this out. I'm exhausted from the walk. My hands are covered in scratches. The sun shows no sign of rising. It's still dark here, even though my phone's clock says it should be 5 a.m. My phone's battery is dying, and I have no way to charge it. My wife hasn't called again. She thinks I'm at home, that I came back. But I'm still here.